I'd like to welcome everyone to RSI Day Plus 2015. My name is Trevor Schell, coordinator of today's event. As you can see on the screen behind me, we're joined by pretty much every province across the country, including the Yukon Territories for the first time, a number of U.S. states, Australia, United Arab Emirates, China, and Thailand, England, and Poland. I'd like to first begin to thank our sponsors, without whom today's event would not be possible. The Canadian Union of Public Employees National Office, the Union of Taxation Employees Local 42, the Canadian Staff Union, De Beers Canada, Laurentian University, the Canadian Union of Public Employees Ontario, United Steelworkers Local 2020, and United Steelworkers Local 6500. Now, I've been asked to read a speech from the Minister of Labour, Kevin Flynn. He asked that I pass along his warmest regards to everyone here today, and he wanted to thank you all for the hard work you do on the important topic of repetitive stress injuries. His staff has also sent along a video of a statement he made in the Ontario Legislative Assembly last month in recognition of the annual International Repetitive Injury Awareness Day. And we'll play the video now.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand in the House today and tell you that this Saturday coming up, February 28th, is annual International Repetitive Strain Injury Awareness Day. Now, a lot of people will ask what that is, or will say we didn't know that we had an awareness day. But I can tell you from the people I've spoke to, Speaker, anybody that had a repetitive strain injury will tell you very, very clearly why we need this day. And the goal of this day is to raise awareness on the debilitating nature of repetitive strain injuries and ways we can all prevent them. Each year, we mark Repetitive Strain Injury Awareness Day to promote the avoidance of such injuries, which, while they may not be life-threatening, can certainly be painfully life-altering. At the Ministry of Labour and throughout Ontario's health and safety system, we use a broader term, musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs for short. This term describes the injuries and disorders of the musculoskeletal system that can be caused or aggravated by not only repetitive work, but also by forceful exertions, fixed or awkward postures, vibration, and other physical causes. But, Speaker, regardless of what we call these injuries, preventing them is always better than trying to cure them after the fact. These injuries take a tremendous toll on our workforce. They account for more than 40% of all lost time injuries that are allowed by the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. Now, Speaker, if you look beyond the pain, the suffering, the social, emotional, and economic costs to affected individuals, you'll also see there's economic cost to MSDs, to all of us, estimated at more than $26 billion annually. Now, Speaker, I think we can do better than this. These injuries, for the most part, are entirely preventable. Ontario workers and employers have numerous resources to help protect against these often painful MSDs. These resources can be found through my ministry, through the WSIB, through all our health and safety partners across this province, and the many other sources that are interested in workers' health and safety in Ontario. Year-round, the Ministry of Labour and its partners continue to enforce workplace legislation, to raise awareness of hazards in the workplace, to train workplace parties, and we also research the issue of MSDs and how we can further prevent them. Now, when we go and do a workplace visit, Speaker, the Ministry's occupational health and safety inspectors focus on a number of things. They look at ensuring those workplaces have a functioning internal responsibility system. They identify the hazards in the workplace, and that includes MSD hazards. What they do, Speaker, as well is that they ensure compliance with our existing health and safety legislation. Ministry of Labour Occupational Health and Safety Inspectors, Speaker, also receive training in MSD hazard recognition. All employers in the province of Ontario are responsible under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to take every precaution that's reasonable under the circumstances to protect the health and the safety of their workers. This includes protection from workplace hazards that could lead to these disorders. Ministry inspectors and ergonomists issue orders under the Act and the regulations that accompany that Act And what they say, Speaker, what they require employers to do is to implement measures addressing MSD hazards for ergonomic assessments and related preventative measures, complete ergonomic assessments in the workplace, and provide worker training to prevent MSDs. Speaker, the government's committed to reducing MSDs right here in the province of Ontario. We know there remains much more to do. We must continue to create that positive change in a collaborative way in cooperation with both the workers and the employers in this province. We must continue to promote a culture of prevention in the province. And Speaker, I'm convinced that we all work together, we can achieve that goal we all want, that being safer, healthier workplaces right throughout the province of Ontario. Thank you, Speaker.
I've also been asked to read a greetings from George Gratiotis, the Chief Prevention Officer for the province of Ontario. It is my sincere pleasure to extend my best wishes to everyone attending OCAL's 16th Annual RSI Day. I am thrilled to hear about the level of engagement in this event with our province, our country, and beyond. Repetitive strain injuries are an important issue, and your collective efforts are vital to reduce the prevalence. My ministry colleagues and I are grateful for the efforts of the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario workers in providing a forum for such as this to foster communication, discussion of solutions, and that will be needed in the future. RSIs are one of the most common workplace injuries in Ontario. The data we have on MSDs, the umbrella term which includes RSIs, show they account for 37% of all lost time claims in Ontario in 2013. This amounted to over 20,000 claims, over 430,000 days lost, and over $65.5 million in insurance costs. MSDs have a life-changing impact on Ontario workers. Whether it is an office worker typing at a computer, a store clerk stocking shelves at the local department store, or a stonemason hauling heavy bricks, RSIs can affect any worker, anywhere, anytime. The good news is the incidence of MSDs has been decreasing over the past decade. Between 2003 and 2013, the rate of lost time injury claims for MSDs has decreased by 56%. While some progress has been made, the ongoing evolution of equipment and technology within workplaces will only continue to pose challenges for health and safety. More work needs to be done if this positive momentum is to continue. Right now, the Ministry of Labour is working with other system partners to implement healthy and safe Ontario workplaces, the province's strategy for transforming the political occupational health and safety system. As part of this effort, the system is identifying initiatives targeting MSDs, including RSIs. We have developed videos, sectoral-specific resource documents to help raise awareness about measures to control multiple hazards, from the handling of beer kegs to the pushing and pulling of industrial waste containers. By raising awareness through these tools and resources, workers and employers can have an impact on reducing RSIs in their own workplaces. The work that we all do to prevent workplace injuries, illness, and fatalities is important. It makes a difference to individual lives, families, workplaces, and communities. I encourage you to continue showing leadership and prevention efforts within your workplaces and push forward on initiatives that can help to continue the downward trend of MSDs, such as RSIs. We do not only communicate and work well with others outside the occupational health and safety system, but also continue the dialogue with each other. We must remain committed to our goal of ensuring workers in this province are protected from fatalities, injuries, and major health hazards on the job. With those objectives in mind, I want to thank you all once again for participating in today's event and wish you all a productive day. Yours truly, George Gratiotis, Chief Prevention Officer, Province of Ontario. Now, I've also been asked to play a video on behalf of David Chesney, our President of OCAL's Board of Directors.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Chesney, and I am President and Chair of the Board of OCAL. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I'd like to congratulate both Trevor and your fellow ergonomists from the clinics for presenting the 16th Annual RSI Plus Day 2015 here in Sudbury at the Edo. Wow, what a terrific accomplishment to be able to offer such a valuable learning experience to all those present and participating worldwide. That's amazing. I'm disappointed, though, that I could not make the presentation in person today, as I'm away on business attending pre-scheduled legal branch meetings. Although looking at the agenda, there are many great topics of interest with many great presenters who will have much to offer for all those participating. I wish you well and look forward to the day's events. Please extend my best wishes to all involved and thank you to everyone who was able to participate virtually and in person here today.
I'd also like to comment on the fact that this is the first time in the 16 years that I've been doing RSI Day out of Sudbury that we have ergonomists from the other OCAL clinics with us. So we have staff from the Windsor-Sarnia clinics, Hamilton, Thunder Bay, and Sudbury all here presenting for you today. So it's the first time we've done this, so I hope everyone gets a lot out of it today. I would now like to introduce Sudbury's new Executive Director, Denis Boulot, who is just going to say a few words, and then we'll begin the event. So, Denis?
Thank you, Trevor, and my name is Denis Boulot. Welcome you personally today to this event, and I hope you'll get a lot out of it because we've been preparing this and we've got a full day of information for you. And I will try to keep it brief because we are running a little bit late, but I'm the last, I guess, of the officials to actually speak today, and after that we get into the presentations. So I'd like to say welcome and thank you for joining us. And I want to emphasize that, as Trevor's just said, this is a team aspect. We have many ergos from all of our offices participating in RSI Day today. And you will hear many of them talk about some specific issues, but also we're ready here and willing to share the knowledge that we have with you. At OCAL, we do work as a team. So as you will see today, if one of our ergonomists has a problem that he has difficulty with, he has certainly a whole bunch of other ergonomists behind him to give you the best service we can. So we are here to make workplaces safer and better, and that we can only do with your help. So just to say a little bit in French, bonjour, mon nom est Denis Boileau. Je vous remercie de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Et je voulais simplement mettre un peu d'emphase que vous allez voir plusieurs présentations aujourd'hui de divers ergos. Et c'est un travail d'équipe. Si jamais un de nos ergos a un problème, il peut se fier sur d'autres. Et alors, on est là pour mieux assurer un milieu de travail. Et si vous avez besoin de nos services, communiquez avec nous. On est prêt à vous aider. Thank you very much. Have a splendid day.
Thank you, Denis. I'd now like to introduce our first presenter for the day, Curtis Vandegrit, ergonomist at our Hamilton clinic. Curtis?
Thanks, Trevor. Is the microphone working? Everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. So thanks. What I'm going to be talking about today is an app that we're currently working on. It's not finished, but you get to see a sneak peek of what we're working on. And I'll show you that at the end of the presentation. But first, I'm just going to give you a bit of background. So what I want to talk about is just OCAL's approach in general and how we work with workplaces when we are going in and working with joint health and safety committees. The basis for the app, what it's based on, use of body maps in workplaces in general, and an OCAL survey tool that we have developed related to this, and then the design of the app itself. So just to start, we're a little different than a lot of consulting companies or ergonomists that you might have worked with in the past, in that we really try and focus on the medical side of things first. So we look at health, things like symptoms or diagnosis. Whether that's within a workplace, we look for patterns, different trends of types of pain and discomfort that workers might be experiencing, or there could actually be a trend of a certain diagnosis or a certain type of injury that's prominent. A lot of other organizations will simply focus on the exposure side. So they'll look at what are people doing, how often are they doing it, what type of MSD or musculoskeletal disorder hazards are people exposed to. But we really try and blend the two together and look at it both from what people are experiencing and what we're observing in terms of the work that's performed. And what that ultimately comes down to is looking at work-relatedness. Are these injuries or symptoms related to the workplace exposures. And in an ergonomic context, that would be things like heavy lifting, high forces, high repetition, prolonged postures, awkward postures, things like that, which you may be familiar with. But ultimately, we're trying to relate that back to scientific evidence. Has there been a demonstrated link between those things within the literature? But the ultimate goal of all of that is once we've learned what people are experiencing in a workplace and what they're exposed to, ultimately we're trying to focus on prevention. How can we help workplaces to actually take steps to alleviate those symptoms, to change the hazards that are present so that people aren't getting injuries and aren't experiencing pain and discomfort in the workplace? What the app is based on and what we've done with a lot of workplaces is used a body mapping or a discomfort survey, and here's the original paper that was published by Marley and Kumar related to this. And what it does is it essentially asks people on a scale of 0 to 10 how much pain or discomfort they're feeling in a bunch of different body areas, which I'll show you in a second. It also asks how often you're experiencing this pain and discomfort. So it's one thing to have pain, but how often are you having that pain, which is an important aspect to consider. So here's a snapshot of a survey that I've used in lots of workplaces where I ask people, how much pain or discomfort are you feeling in all of these different areas? So, and again, you would put in on the left box, you would put a number from 0 to 10, and in the right box, you would put, A, B, C, D, depending on how frequently you feel that pain. And what the researchers have done with this is they put together a really nice matrix that you can see here. And what it is a predictor of seeking medical treatment. So ultimately, the higher the pain and discomfort that you have, and the more often you have that pain, the more likely you are to seek medical treatment. That could be your family doctor, it could be a chiropractor, physiotherapist, you could be going to the ER. Ultimately, another way, it's just a predictor of you have something wrong and it's gotten to the point where you're going to be seeking medical help. Another way of looking at it is just measure of severity. So green being low, yellow being moderate, and red being severe. And what we can do in workplaces when we do this is survey all of the workers in a workplace, and we can, here's an office example. So we can ask people again, this is a PDF fillable form where we can email it out to all of the office staff, ask them how much pain or discomfort they're feeling, get them to fill this out, and then they would submit it. And we also ask questions related to physical exposures, right, as I mentioned. So this varies based on the type of work that you're doing. So in an office setting, it's going to be very different than in a mine, as an example. So here's an example of some of the exposure type questions we would ask in an office. So, what height is your monitor at? Do you have to bend your neck? Is your monitor directly in front of you? When you're mousing, where is the mouse? Do you have to bend your wrist when you're mousing or typing? Those types of questions. Now, in an industrial setting, we've come up with different versions of different questions, but getting at the same type of thing. So, overall, how would you rate the comfort of your workstation? Or how often do you have to bend in your job? Or how often do you have to lift things? Questions like that. And what we can do with this is demonstrate in different ways, visually, the types of trends that we would see in workplaces. So here's an example of a workplace that I went to in a particular department. And you can see, just visually, it's really nice how you can notice certain trends like back pain, right arm pain. This was an office, so you can appreciate why people would have a lot of right arm pain since most people are right hand dominant. Another way of looking at it is in chart form like this. So you can see the percentage of people that are having some type of pain and how much of that is low, moderate, or severe, or again, their likelihood of seeking medical treatment. So you can see as we go along, you start to see more spikes for the right side. And then the real big one was the neck and the back, particularly in an office setting. So what we've done in addition to this is we actually empowered workplaces to do this themselves. So it doesn't always require OCAL to be involved. A lot of times we only have, I believe, 7 ergonomists across the province. So our resources are a bit limited in terms of actually being able to go into workplaces and do this for them. So what we've done is developed an Excel spreadsheet tool where they can administer this type of survey themselves, simply enter in the responses, and then it spits out lots of nice, colorful reports for you. So here's an example. You can see that you would go through and you could add additional questions like what department do they work in, what job title do they have, male, female, right-handed, left-handed, etc. And then from there, you would input the discomfort questions. And again, we see down here we have some of the exposure questions and whatever the response was. And ultimately, once you've entered all of this, you simply go to a different tab in the spreadsheet, and you see things like this. It's a bit skewed, I apologize for that, but we've put together different charts so you can see at a high level where the discomfort trends are showing up for different people. And then we also have another breakdown like this. So the one on the left is the percentage of people that were basically in the 2 or 3 category, the somewhat likely or very likely. And then the one on the right is only those that reported very likely for different body areas. So you can see some trends there where you have over 50% of people with either moderate or severe back pain, as an example. And it's color-coded, so the more prominent it is, the color coding changes. So pink there for the low back and for the right hand and wrist. And this was in an industrial setting. What we can also do is chart out the different trends in the exposure questions that were answered. So this type of thing. You can see the average as well as for each of the questions. And here we've broken it out into the number of people, like percentage-wise, how everyone answered the questions. So you have both the average, but then you can also see the breakdown of how people responded. And this is another way of showing it, again, showing the max and the minimum in terms of responses, as well as the average. So from there, what we thought was, we've given this a tool to workplaces, and that's one start, but a lot of times it still involves our interaction or dialogue with the workplace to walk them through and administer this type of survey. How can we reach as many people as possible? How can we reach workers on the front line to give them direct access to this type of thing? Not necessarily in a survey form, but raise awareness about how their pain and discomfort could be related to the work that they're doing. So from there, we've tried to focus on designing a mobile app for individuals, as I mentioned. And the intent is to raise awareness about work-related pain and give them some suggestions or recommendations on what they can do to alleviate it or steps they can take in their workplace. So it recommends what they might be able to do to address certain exposures and ultimately give them an idea of where they're feeling pain and discomfort. So we're still finalizing the design and some of the content like the exposure questions, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of the direction we're headed. So recently we actually put together 2 prototypes, and this is my fancy user testing setup where I had individuals come in and actually tried 2 different designs of the app itself to try and learn, what people find confusing, what's easy to use about it, where we could improve it before we actually launch. So I had, I believe, 6 individuals come in, and again, just because of the demographics, the target for this is probably a younger worker crowd, so new or young workers, millennials, people that use their smartphone all the time for everything, and try and engage them a little bit and get thinking about workplace exposures and how that could be related to the pain that they're feeling. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek here. Hopefully I can just switch to this quickly. It's in the browser. Okay, here we go. So here's a current prototype that we're on based on the results of that user testing that we learned. So we made some modifications, but that gives you a sort of a high-level overview of the way the app will interact or perform once we actually launch it. So here you would just enter by clicking the Start button. It walks you through the steps that you would, as a user, would do. So essentially you're going to answer some questions about where you feel pain. Then you're going to answer some questions about what you're exposed to or what you do in your day-to-day work. And then it'll ultimately walk you through with some recommendations on what you can do to address it. So we'd click Start here. Then from here, it's just sort of a high level. You can see I don't have all of the individual body parts on this screen. It would be really hard to click on that on a small phone screen. So we broke it up into 5 major areas. And so in this example, we'd say that we have some shoulder pain. So we're going to click on right arm here. You can see here we've got a little image with the dot demonstrating that you're answering for right shoulder. And you've got a pain scale here that's nicely color-coded. So I would just say, okay, I've got a pretty significant amount of shoulder pain. So you click 7, for example. And then you see here the frequency. So how often are you experiencing that pain? And I'm going to say I experience that pretty often. You'll note that there's actually a word again, from the original paper from Marlene Kumar, so there's word anchors. So as you go across, you go from no discomfort, which would be 0, all the way to extreme discomfort, which would be 10. And this color and the color coding of the word actually changes based on your responses. And you'll note also that the dot on the shoulder has changed color to align with that exposure matrix as well. So then we would scroll down. You can see here we've got upper arm, and then elbow, lower arm, wrist, hand, etc. So then once we've entered our pain, if we had pain in multiple areas, we would do that. Then you'd click submit. Now it gives you sort of a summary. So if you had multiple areas that you'd entered pain, you'd sort of see an overview here. I had right shoulder pain, I had low back pain, for example, and maybe left knee pain, whatever it might be that you had responded. From there, you would click next, go to the next section. And here you have some exposure questions, which we still haven't finalized yet, but this gives you an idea of what it would look like. And so here you have overall, how would you rate the comfort of your workstation, depending on where you work. And again, we're trying to make this generic so that it can apply to as many people as possible. So we have to have questions that can be somewhat specific, but also generic enough that it can apply to lots of different environments, lots of different work settings. So we choose one here and we'd say, okay, my workstation is pretty poor. And again, you would go down and you would answer all of the additional questions. So once you had answered the exposure questions, you would simply click submit. And now you've got, again, a sort of a summary of here's your pain that you experienced with some ideas or recommendations about if you've got severe pain, you probably need to do something about it. You might want to talk to your family doctor. You might want to talk to some other health professional about the pain that you're experiencing and why you might be experiencing it. At the same time, you can click here on workplace recommendations, and you'll note that they're broken up. So based on the exposure questions that you answer, if you say you do a lot of bending, for example, then you could click here, and you would see some of the sort of high-level recommendations about things you might want to consider to reduce the amount of bending that you do in your job. So there's an example of some of the recommendations you might make. So you could, collapse all of these if you wanted, or, look at ones individually, and then ultimately you'd be able to export that and email it to yourself or download it in some other form. But that's sort of a general overview of the app at this point, and so we're currently working to try and finalize it, and hopefully we'll be launching it in the spring sometime, probably May or June. At that point, I think I'll just leave it to anyone if they have any questions. Yes, this will definitely be free. So we want it to be freely available to as many people as possible. So there will be no charge associated with it. And it'll be in all 3 platforms as well. So it'll be in iOS, Google Play Store, as well as BlackBerry. Okay, thank you. I believe next up is Dwayne. So I'm going to ask him to come forward.
Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction to safe lifting and protecting your back. A lot of the information will be probably a little bit repetitive for some of you, but it's always a good review for sure. At least 60% of all adults will experience back pain within their lifetime. Back injury, back pain, most frequent cause of activity limitation for individuals under the age of 45. It's the 3rd leading cause in individuals between the ages of 45 and 64. Show of hands, how many people have not ever had back pain in their life? That's what I thought. That's why the numbers are what the numbers are. Okay? Back pain doesn't necessarily always mean a major back injury. But where there's a flame, there will eventually be a fire. 65% of industrial workers report low back pain symptoms during their careers. 65 report it. Doesn't mean that 65 is the percentage. Right? I think we had, I'm not sure how many people are in here, but a fair number, and I think there was 2 people that raised their hands, so they haven't had back pain ever. They probably need to think about that a little bit to make sure that they've never had back pain. 25% of reported work injuries are due to back pain or back injuries. Okay. Excuse me. And at least 20% of lost work days are due to back injuries. That's an awful lot. Okay, the anatomy of the back, basically a healthy back relies on your skeletal system, soft tissue being primarily your muscle, and your nervous system to function properly. Your spine, your spinal column, is comprised of your vertebrae and obviously your spinal nerves, okay, and your spinal column, or your spinal cord, sorry. Spinal column provides protection for the spinal nerves. It helps provide support to your body. It provides a place for the muscle attachment. And it also allows movement, okay? Multi-directional movement. The intervertebral discs are basically shock absorbers between each individual vertebra. Okay?
I don't know.
Good way to look at it is it's kind of like a hockey puck.
On buttons.
Okay? In between the vertebra. They help permit movement because that's what allows each vertebra to move. Okay? Because the disc is flexible and moves in accordance with each vertebra. Okay, they're composed of, I'm not going to go through a lot of this, they're composed of an outer layer and an inner jelly-like substance. Okay? Aging, over time, deterioration of the discs begins in your 30s. Okay? It begins due to decreased fluid, decreased size. So from that time on, basically, you're seeing some decrease in function of the discs, naturally, due to aging. The ligaments help hold the vertebra in place, okay? They help stabilize the spinal column. They help prevent, obviously, excessive movement, and they connect the vertebra together. Excuse me. The musculature of the torso, the lower back musculature, provides stabilization for the spine. It helps maintain spinal alignment. It allows voluntary movement. Okay? Your muscle is what allows you to move. Okay? That is what happens. Muscle contracts, movement's created. Okay? But the musculature of primarily your lower back is very small in relation to the musculature in your legs. Okay? If you look on the picture there, the lower part, the part that's lighter, white, that's primarily your lower back muscle. Okay? In relation, just the surface area is considerably smaller than the musculature of your legs. Okay? Your gluteals, which is basically the muscles of your rear end. Okay? They also have lower force production in relation to your leg musculature. And I know you're saying, well, okay. This is super important in terms of safe lifting and lifting in general. The musculature of the abdominals. They provide stabilization as well. Also help maintain spinal alignment. Okay? Also allow voluntary movement. The abdominal muscles basically support the abdominal contents and support the spinal column from the front back. Okay? It is really important to realize and to note that in terms of having a healthy back in terms of being functional in terms of your movement, functional in terms of lifting, that you have to consider both the musculature in the front, the abdominal muscles, as well as the musculature in the back. Okay? A very good example is the example of a weightlifting belt. Okay? Most people have seen individuals with weightlifting belts. The weightlifting belt does not support the lower back musculature. In fact, what it does is it brings the abdominal musculature in tight, and that's where the support comes from. It supports the lower back and the torso from the front. So it's extremely important to realize the function of the abdominals and all of the torso muscles together in terms of lower back health and function. Okay? The abdominal muscles have decreased strength or can demonstrate decreased strength due to poor posture. Okay? Obviously, any postures that are going to increase your lordotic curve and bring you in a sway back position are going to stretch the abdominals. Okay? In a stretched position, those abdominal muscles are not as strong and functional as they would in a position in which you have neutral posture on a regular basis. Poor physical conditioning, okay, also is demonstrative of a decrease in muscular strength in the abdominal region, okay? And poor flexibility in the posterior region. Similar to what I just said about the sway back position, if the lower back muscles, the musculature of the gluteals and the hamstring are very inflexible, they will naturally pull your body back into that position, naturally decrease the function and the strength ability and the muscular endurance ability of the abdominal musculature. Okay, just a little bit of biomechanics. Basically, the fulcrum is in the center of the load force and the effort force. The further away that the load force is from the fulcrum, the more force is required in terms of an effort to keep the lever in a balance. The biomechanics in terms of the lower back. In terms of the body, the load force is simply the object that you're lifting or you're attempting to move. The effort force is generated from the torso musculature. The torso, the midpoint, the point that's the pivot point, the fulcrum is the torso. Okay, so you can see that increasing the horizontal distance, meaning increasing the distance in which, I don't need that. Increasing the distance in which the weight is away from the fulcrum, meaning the further away the weight is, the more difficult. Oh, I pushed the button. Oh, there we go. Does it get me back there? I pushed the button I wasn't supposed to push, right?
I didn't push it with my thumb. It was all good till he moved this away. It's not my fault. Where was I? So the further away the load force is, okay, the further away the object is from the fulcrum, which is your torso, the more difficult or the increased effort force required. Okay? So the result is increased stress placed on the musculature and the joints of the lower back and of the torso. Okay? It's a concept that everyone seems to nod their head and know, but in terms of functionality and utilizing it, we generally don't utilize it as much as we should. Simply stand with your arms out and hold your arms straight and have someone try to push your arms down. It takes a lot more effort to hold them off than if your arms are in this position. And we all know that. We've all experimented and done that throughout our childhood and adolescence. Yet when it comes to lifting, carrying, and moving things, we often don't think that way. Okay? We often don't think, okay, well, that's way out there. I'm going to somehow rectify that so that I'm not having to exert that extra effort force. In terms of an injury, repetitive strain injury, we basically look at three main risk factors, that of force, repetition, and posture. Now what? Where did it go? Where'd the guy go? There we go. Figured it out. Keep screwing up. Eventually you figure out how to fix it. Force. Force can be over time. Okay? It can also be in terms of any type of injury. And back injuries are ones that seem to be common with this, is a single high load force. Okay? An example in here is basically using a piece of machinery. Being from Thunder Bay, this is our staple piece of machinery. Okay? Everybody has one. In terms of this is an example of a person that basically went over a large bump, landed, okay? The force potentially exceeded what the structures were capable of handling, resulting in injury. Okay? Increased repetition. The more repetitious a movement is, okay, the more stresses that are placed upon the structures involved. Awkward postures. This is an example of prolonged awkward postures without relief. Okay, so you can see that force, repetition, and awkward postures all play a role in potential injury. Now, they're all additive and overlapping. So the more you can decrease even a slight percentage of any one of these risk factors or all of these risk factors, it's going to be exponential in terms of decreasing your overall chance of injury. Rest. Resting increases your tolerance. Okay? When we load bodily structures, i.e. muscle, bone, okay? Basically what happens is there's a micro trauma, a slight injury to the tissues. This is basically the concept behind resistance training. That's what happens. You resistance train, you do push-ups. Okay? You're traumatizing the muscle slightly. You sometimes get sore, sometimes you don't. You rest, you take time, the body naturally rebuilds itself. In order to combat that trauma so that the next time you do the same thing, the body isn't traumatized in the same way, your body repairs itself better. Okay? Slightly better. You need to have rest to get that recovery. That recovery allows those structures to have an increased tolerance of the same stress that they've had previously.
That's the simple concept of how resistance training builds muscle, increases strength, and increases muscular endurance. But that functions the same with everything. That's how the human body works. Okay? If you limit the rest, basically you're limiting the amount of recovery. Basically, no recovery or limited recovery, you increase the chance of injury. So what happens when we lift? Okay? We potentially fatigue conditioned and, more specifically, for the most part, unconditioned musculature. Okay? We place uneven pressure are placed on the discs. Okay? Which creates movement within the disc. Okay? Basically, if you look at the two illustrations, you can see the top one is the beginning of the vertebrae moving forward. The bottom one is demonstrating on how the disc is slightly displaced within there. Okay? Again, high force, awkward postures, high repetition, that displacement is either exacerbated in terms of magnitude, okay, or it's continued over time. Potentially leads to injury. Degeneration of the back, okay, basically is the wearing of the intervertebral discs. As previously mentioned, it increases with aging. And it naturally increases with aging. Okay, it increases with aging due to the way our body's recuperation system functions over time. Okay? But it can also result from chronic loading of the tissues. Okay? Unnatural postures, again, this sounds repetitive, but it's the three things you got to remember all the time. The force exerted, the duration and the time spent in those unnatural postures. Increase the chances and exacerbate the natural degeneration process. Degeneration process, basically the structure within the disc becomes brittle, loses fluid, okay? It doesn't function the same way that it did prior to the process beginning. There's three general stages of degeneration, okay? This protrusion, the first stage, where the fluid within the disc stretches the fibers. Herniation, where there's an actual rupture of fibers. And then the prolapse, okay? Excuse me. The prolapse is not as prevalent as individuals think. But as you can see, once you get through those processes of degeneration, it's degenerated. Okay? Once there's rupture, once there's damage, there's damage. You want to avoid and try to curb those situations before it gets to the level of something like a herniation and or a prolapse. Now, in terms of lifting, our technique is absolutely essential. Principles of lifting can be summed up in a simple acronym. Back. Keep your back straight. Avoid twisting. The object that you're lifting close to your body, and keep the lift as smooth as possible. What I mean by back straight is basically keeping a neutral spine. Keeping a neutral spine helps to align the torso correctly and maintain the spine's natural curvatures. Okay? Those curvatures have developed over time based on gravity. And the structures of our body have adapted based on gravity to be in a more correct position. Uh-oh. Here we go again. This thing has a mind of its own. Being in a neutral posture, neutral spinal posture, helps the torso and keeps the torso moving. Okay, the illustration at the bottom, if everybody can see it, is basically showing some examples of what can happen to the discs if you're not in a neutral posture. And again, one-offs, every now and again, there's some stress, but you have relief, you have recovery. The stresses often don't cause injury. If it's a high force stress, or if it's prolonged, or if it's high repetition, without the rest and recuperation, you potentially end up with damage to the discs. Your posture, neutral posture. The illustration on the right with the green check mark, that person's torso is not straight per se, but that person's torso is in a neutral posture, where with the legs bent, the hips down, the head up, the shoulders back, that is maintaining the neutral or the natural curvature of the spine as best as possible while performing that movement. It is essential in order to maintain neutral posture to have balanced, strong torso musculature. It's all fine and good for me to say, this is how you should lift. But if you're physically incapable to lift that way, you will not be able to lift that way. It's plain and simple. You can't hold your body into that position. You cannot lift and move objects while maintaining a neutral posture. Again, the illustrations of the discs give you an example on how the pressure is placed upon the disc. The incorrect or unnatural, awkward posture on the left versus the more neutral posture utilized on the right. Avoid twisting. Okay? Twisting obviously weakens the discs. Okay? It weakens the discs because now it's putting them under pressure. Okay? It causes pain, causes inflammation at the facet joints, which we didn't really go through, but it's just part of the vertebra. Okay? That potentially can bind and catch. Fairly simple. Move the feet and or pivot so everything is moving in a unit. Okay? Why don't we move our feet? Why do we just twist? Because we're lazy. That's why. Because in general, inherently, subconsciously, this takes less effort than this. Okay? Close to the body. Remember the biomechanics. Your torso is your fulcrum. The muscle force
is required to counterbalance the weight. That's just if you're holding it. The muscle force must overcome the weight in order to actually lift it. Okay? Again, further distance away from the body, greater stress upon the back. Keep smooth. Quick, explosive movements increase the stress on all of the structures. Okay? High force. Increase stress on the musculature, increase stress on the discs, and also create other numerous safety issues. Dropping issues, slipping issues. When one of those two things happen, wherever the object may fall, can cause a multitude of other different injuries as well. Okay? Controlled continuous movements allow sequential muscle activation and uniform stress on the body. When moving in this fashion, it's far more easy to keep neutral posture if you're doing it under control than it is if you're trying to explode up. It takes far more muscular strength and endurance to hold yourself in a neutral posture when the movement is fast and explosive. When you're performing a lift with a partner, this sometimes can be more detrimental if there's not adequate communication and it's done under control. Because one person's lifting while one person's not. Okay, so it's imperative with partner lifts that they're planned, coordinated, and there's communication. Lifting is also affected by several other factors. The weight of the object, the grip, the vertical location, obviously how big the object is, and the balance of the object. The object weight. This one's pretty much in everyone's head all the time. Everybody kind of knows this, right? The heavier it is, the more difficult. The more probability for poor technique. Not that difficult for me to come down and pick up a 2 or 3, 4 pound weight like that. Once that weight becomes heavier and heavier, there is a greater requirement for full body muscular strength in order to maintain neutral posture. It also increases the probability of jerking and lifting explosively, and naturally increases the probability of injury. So what do? You help yourself. First of all, find out what the weight is. Test the weight. Try pushing it a little bit, tipping it, testing it. In a job situation that you're utilizing and moving, carrying, lifting the same things all the time, you should know what the weights are. Utilize a lifting aid if possible, if required. Get help with a partner if required. Do not lift something that you think might be too heavy, because you should be erring on the side of caution. If it might be too heavy, then why lift it? Why lift it without the use of an aid or without the use of a partner? Horizontal location. This is the third time I've repeated it. Third time this picture's been on here. Okay? Biomechanics. Further away it is, greater the chance of injury. The dimensions of the object. obviously increase the difficulty. But it also decreases the grip. It's far more difficult to hold on to an object that's further out. The picture here basically shows the same object standing on end versus laying flat. Same weight, same object. Less stress to move it when it's standing on end, because the object can naturally be pulled closer towards your torso. This is an example that people need to consider as well. Not just the object. It's an example of body size changing. Okay? It really makes no difference whether it's the object that's out there or if there's an impediment in the front of you that you can't grasp the object. Whether that is body shape, okay, of an individual that's larger in the front, or whether that's the podium right here and something on the other side that is impeding me from going and getting it, it makes a huge difference. Grip. Poor grip obviously increases the chance of injury for several reasons. Again, dropping the item, having it fall, hit something. In the process of dropping it, you then tend to increase the force, increase the explosiveness to try to curb it from dropping. Okay? And it also changes your movement patterns, and it also changes how you hold something. If you've got a fairly large box that might not be too heavy, but it's a complete box with no handles, nothing to hold on to, and you have to put your arms all the way around it to grasp it, your likelihood in order to lift it and or carry it would be to do this because you can't hold on to it. Now you've started from a decent neutral posture, and you've now put yourself into an unnatural, awkward posture that's going to inevitably increase the injury potential. So how do you avoid that? Don't lift or move anything that you don't have adequate grip. Use tools. I just listed a couple. Lifting straps, the orange ones in the middle, are probably the easiest, best lifting tool you can have. You can roll them up and put them in your pocket. You can put them around anything. You can get them at several lengths. You can buy them at any hardware store. They have loops all the way down that you can put on your forearm. You need to move something large, you put them on there, underneath, you tilt it, you put it underneath, and it's there. You can provide yourself the opportunity to be in as neutral posture as possible with fairly good, if not great, grip with almost every single thing that you're going to have to lift. And it doesn't have to be something that is extremely heavy, which you shouldn't be lifting in the first place. But any type of object, because they're straps, any shape, any surface, you can utilize the straps to increase your grip and inevitably increase your neutral posture position. Vertical location. Increase the distance traveled vertically. It obviously increases the difficulty. You're going to take something from up here. Again, now you're putting yourself in a risky biomechanical position. It increases the chance of injury. Again, decreased safety. It not only increases the chance of musculoskeletal injury, it increases the chance of several other different types of injuries in terms of things falling, breaking, landing. Okay? Again, how do you help yourself? Don't lift anything over your shoulders. The optimal space to store objects is basically between your knuckle level and chest level, to minimize the vertical distance. A great example I like to use with this is paper boxes. Okay, you have your copier. Most organizations bring the paper in boxes, right? There's 8 to 10 reams of paper in there. The box weighs 44 pounds. Well, the box gets brought in somehow, carried in. Then you lower it and put it on the floor. Then when you need either to move it or to utilize the whole box or one ream of paper, you then bend down, come down, and get the ream of paper. Why not create a system, a storage system, where the box comes in, it gets stored right at waist level. When you need to then move it, you take it right at waist level. It sounds like a simple concept, yet very, very few individuals utilize that concept. And that's something that we'll get to in a bit in terms of planning, that you can plan out. It's not that difficult. Yeah, maybe you need to get more reinforced shelving. Maybe you need to create spaces that are like that. But objects that are heavier and objects that you utilize and move and access most often should be stored from thigh to chest level. Objects that are lighter and or utilized less often should be stored below that or above that. For instance, you have open files of whatever it is you're dealing with, and you have old closed files of whatever it is you're dealing with. Those don't have to go in alphabetical order like this. Why not put all the open ones on the shelving, the two shelving levels from your thigh to your chest? All the closed ones above and below. Closed ones you might access once a year. You might never access them again. The open ones you're potentially accessing all the time. Asymmetrical loading. Unbalanced loads inevitably create awkward postures. Okay? They create and maintain twisting and or leaning. Okay, the carrying of the briefcase. Carrying of a toolbox. The requirement is an unbalanced force production. And especially if it's repetitious and chronic. Over and over and over. Again, increased stress on the musculature, increased chance of injury. Again, pretty simple. How do you help yourself? If possible, avoid single-handed carries. Well, how do you do that if there's only one handle? You use a strap. You make the object that only has one handle into an object that has two handles. You try to balance the load as best you can. Utilize a lifting aid. Get a partner. If you have to, on a regular basis, utilize a load, carry a load that's single-handled on a regular basis, consciously alternate the sides that you utilize it with. So the next two slides are the most important slides. They're the most important take-home message from this. Planning. Prepare. The object to be lifted. Where is it? Where does it need to go? If that object is on the other side of that table, and you're looking at it and it needs to go over here, you need to look at, how do I get in there to get in a correct position? How do I find a way so that I'm not reaching over the table and trying to grab it with one hand? Look at that and figure that out. The weight. Know the weights of the objects you're lifting. If you don't know them, test them. Again, I mentioned this earlier. If you're not sure if it's too heavy, it's too heavy. Simple. How big is the object? And what's the shape? Do you require modification or addition of materials so that your grip and your methodology in which you're going to lift and or carry this object are more beneficial to you? Is the grip of whatever it is you're carrying, lifting, is that potentially going to be a good grip for a very short time? Or would that be a good grip for a very long time? And if you're not sure, you need to make sure that you figure out a way to modify, observe, change how you're dealing with your object so that you make sure when you go to lift it, you have the correct grip. Prepare yourself. Again, when you're looking at where you're going, where the object is and where it's going. A lot of people will kind of take a look at the object that they're lifting ahead of time. But very few people will take a look at where they're bringing that object to or where they have to put it. Okay, how is your footing? What's the surface like? Okay? Are your legs in the correct position? Are they shoulder width apart? Obviously, simple balance. The closer that your legs are together, the more unstable you are. The further your base of support, the stronger you are, the more stable you are. Are you physically ready? Is your body ready? Do you have the correct conditioning? Is the musculature strong enough? Does it have enough muscular endurance to do what it is you're thinking about doing? And are you ready to do that movement right now? Are you warmed up? So the lift preparation. Make sure the object's close. Test the weight, shoulder width apart. Bend your knees. Back in neutral posture. Head, neck in a neutral position. Incidentally, where your head goes, your body will follow. There's a reason why when we do front rolls, we tuck our chin. You tuck your chin because that rounds your spine. It's all attached. So you want to stay in a neutral posture, you keep your head up. You want to round your back, you bring your chin down. Okay? Keeping your head up. Once you've found your grip and you have your position, there's no need to be looking down anymore. Because looking down is starting to throw you into awkward, unneutral posture. Tighten the musculature. Utilize the musculature for what it's there for. All of this before you've lifted anything. You've planned all that out. Now you're in position to lift. To lift, I mean, this is pretty simple. Lift with your legs. Your legs are stronger than your lower back and your abdominals. Maintain neutral posture.
Maintain normal breathing. Don't hold your breath. Okay? Normal breathing. If you feel that you need to hold your breath, the object you're attempting to lift is too heavy. Carrying loads. Minimize carrying loads if possible. When and if you need to, make sure you move your feet. This versus this. Use an aid, a wheelbarrow, a dolly. Okay? When you are using carrying aids, push them. Several reasons. Not the least of which, is that you can see where you're going when you're pushing. So right there, you're pushing, you're staying more in a neutral posture. You're pulling, well, you have to see back there. Well, the only way you can see back there is turning your head, which turns your body, which now you're twisted. Okay? Stay in a neutral posture as best you can in that neutral posture. So back care. Regular exercise provides nutrition, nourishment to the body structures. Helps keep them in condition to help recuperation, recovery. Okay? They help to decrease the natural degenerative changes. Regular exercise in terms of back care involves all three. Flexibility, aerobic conditioning, and strength conditioning. And that doesn't mean you need to embark on a big, huge training program. But it's important to do these things. You cannot get into proper neutral postures if you're inflexible. In order to get the nourishment, you need to have adequate aerobic oxygen brought through the structures of your body. Be careful and make sure that there's a balance between the back and the abdominal musculature. If you've been in this position for some reason, for extended periods of time, your back musculature is shortened. It's actually stronger because now it's extended the abdominal musculature. So that's something that needs to be looked at so that there is a balance and a balance is created. Warm up. Prior to any physical activity, prepare the body. It prepares your body for that activity. Warm muscles function more efficiently, and they're less likely to injure because warm muscles are more flexible. It's important to do a slight warm-up before any inactivity. Get up in the morning, there's snow outside, do a warm-up. Walk up and down your stairs for 2 minutes. Carrying groceries is the key, is a big one, especially if you have a lot of groceries and you've been in your vehicle for 25 minutes. You come out, you grab as many bags as you can and you hump them in the house. And then your back potentially is sore or it's not, but over time that wears on it. Why not go in your house, open the door, make sure there's no impediments where the door is, walk back to your vehicle twice. Then take one bag at a time. You've done a slight warm-up, and now you've also decreased the amount of force that's required. And in addition to that, you've also created some extra activity within your life that's going to take a total of probably maybe a minute and a half extra in terms of time. Okay? Warm-up doesn't have to be a full-blown get on a bike or go for a jog warm-up. It's just enough to get everything moving. In summary, think, plan,
And think some more. Think about everything you're going to do prior to lifting. Plan the entire lift. Design the tasks. Warm up. Use good lifting technique. And remember the acronym back. For the most part, outside of extreme emergency situations, we don't need to lift without having time to plan. Maybe emergency personnel or an extreme emergency situation where you might have to jump into action and lift or move something immediately, which might happen once, twice, 3 times in a person's lifetime, unless they're an emergency professional. Every other time, you can take the time to think about it and figure it out and plan it. Get a partner. Don't lift anything you don't think you should. The whole key to safe lifting and protecting yourself from injury is not only knowing what you should do, but planning it in advance and then implementing it. Any questions?
Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions yet. Went over?
Because we're running late for our break?
Yeah. Questions or break? Break. Sorry, buddy. What we actually decided to do, I was just talking to everybody, was in your handouts, for those in the audience, there is an evaluation form. If we are running short on time, what we're going to do is, on those forms, ask your questions there. And then what we're actually going to do is take the questions and send them within the Ergo group of our presenters, and we're all going to answer your questions. So you could get Trevor's opinion, Dwayne's opinion, Brenda's opinion. So we're going to, if just in case we're running short, that questions can still be answered. For those online, continue to ask your questions. eDome are printing off questions that do come in, and we will add that to the list of ones we can do, and then we'll send it off to everyone who's registered so they get a copy of all the answers, so everyone gets a copy of it. So we are going to take a break. We'll come back at 10 after. So see you then. So welcome back. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nick Neforis from our Windsor Clinic.
Was that me? Okay, I guess that's one way to get everybody's attention. My name is Nick. I'm from our Windsor Clinic, and what I'm here to talk about is sitting. To sit or not to sit? Let me ask the audience, what has been said about sitting? What have people heard about sitting? Don't say it's comfortable. It's worse than smoking. Come on, impossible. No. Anybody else? Worse than smoking is the answer. So you're right. To give you some I guess, detailed information, what has been said, you're at risk, twice the risk of getting diabetes. 90% greater risk of cardiovascular disease. That's an ugly number. And how about this one? 49% greater risk of all cause of death. Yuck. Beware of the chair. Sitting increases the risk of death up to 40%. This is important to know that this is based on a 6-hour period. Okay, so sitting 6 or more hours per day makes you 40% likelier to die within 15 years of someone who sits less than 3 hours in a day. That's ugly stuff. Sitting is the new smoking, and it's time to quit. Sitting for too long can kill you, is what they used to say, and now they're saying sitting will kill you. So that stuff is out there. As much as I maybe pose it as a joke or a little bit of a sarcastic view, that stuff is out there. That's published everywhere. If you look up Google and you go sitting and hazards of sitting, these are the type of stuff you find. These are the article headlines. They're linking it directly to death. So now we're going to dig a little deeper and see what exactly happens to the body when we sit down. Why are these numbers so scary and ugly, right? So what goes on? Really, I mean, it is a head-to-toe problem. So let's just trace it down, okay? From a brain function standpoint, there's a lack of blood, lack of oxygen gets pumped to the brain. The release of brain and mood-enhancing chemicals are slowed down. So what does that mean? Mood goes the other way. Foggy brain. Anybody know what foggy brain is? Lack of focus, right? You're starting to lose memory, but you can't focus in on tasks. Stemming down into the neck shoulder area, sitting a lot of times is attributed with awkward neck postures, which increase strain on the cervical vertebrae. Two of the most common, things we find in the office scenario is hunched over. So people being forward sitters, hunching over the keyboard, over our desk work, okay? And then also the best worst example, cradling of the telephone, right? I didn't mean to cradle that phone, but then my hand strayed back to the mouse, and here I am cradling that phone for, what was it? A short phone call has now gone 10, 20 minutes, maybe longer, right? Common ones. Basically, we have static muscle contraction, which we kind of learned about when we saw that static muscle contraction. We're not getting blood flow, so it results in stiffness, in pain. If you're standing up after a long period of time and you're doing this and rubbing something, those muscles that you're rubbing have probably been exposed to some form of static muscle contraction. They're stiffening up. There's a reason behind that. Okay, if we're going to focus in on the low back, there's a lot of issues here, but basically our spine becomes inflexible. There's actually hardening of the collagen around the supporting tendons and ligaments. There's uneven force distribution across our lumbar discs. We actually increase the risk of disc herniation. We're more susceptible to damage in mundane activities. What does that mean? That's simple, bending over to tie the shoe or to pick up the pencil, or somebody calls your name and you just turn around and twist, or you look another way. A mundane little task that maybe is not hazardous by definition now becomes hazardous after we've been sitting for a prolonged period of time. Muscle degeneration and imbalances. So slouching, what happens? We develop weak abdominal muscles and we have tight back muscles. And that all ties in with posture, right? So the more these muscles tighten, the more prone we are to stay in that slouch or that forwardly bent position. There's also a tightening of the hips and weak glutes. Basically, the hip flexors don't get extended. They're contracted in this position. That leads to poor balance and stability. All I want to say here is that tight hip flexor muscles are actually the #1 cause of falls in elderly, right? So maybe we'll say that nobody here yet is in the elderly category in life yet, but when you enter that stage, the last thing you want to know at that point is that all those years of sitting have led to this tightening of the back, but also of the hip muscles, and now you're at increased risk of falling because you don't have stability, you don't have balance anymore. Heart disease. So that was a pretty scary stat, right? We said like 90% increased chance of cardiovascular disease. So what's going on here? Well, basically the muscles are burning, or they burn less fat, and blood flow is reduced. So what happens here? We're allowing fatty acids to clog the heart. Okay? Researchers have linked prolonged sitting to high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, and again, twice the risk of cardiovascular disease. There's actually overproduction in our pancreas. What's going on? Basically, long story short, the pancreas produces insulin. Insulin carries glucose for energy that's used. But in the idle muscles, we don't use up enough energy. So what's happening? The pancreas actually goes into kind of overproduction, so it's creating more and more insulin. And that's really what's been caused, or linked, I should say, to the development of, or tied in with twice the risk of type 2 diabetes. So when you hear that stat, how can sitting be tied to diabetes? That's because of it. The pancreas basically goes into overdrive and it's making stuff for energy, but your body's not using that energy. So what happens with it? And that's the big risk factor there. Here's some more ugly numbers. Okay, 24% increased risk of colon cancer, 32% of endometrial cancer, 21% risk of lung cancer. What? How is this possible? How is this linked? So the direct cause, right, there's no known cause or identified cause yet or to pinpoint on cancer, but the theories and research, what they're saying and what they're showing is they think that there's, again, that excess of insulin that's created, it encourages cell growth. So if there's cancerous cells in the body, it's going to increase, they're going to grow, they're going to multiply. So that's kind of where the one theory is. The other theory is that with regular movement, we boost natural antioxidants that kill cell-damaging or cancerous cells. So if we cut out regular movement, we are not getting those natural antioxidants. That's the other theory on it. Okay, so that's how it's linked. At first, it seemed, how's that possible that's linked to cancer? And really, that's how what they're finding. Leg disorders, poor circulation, pooling in the fluid in the legs, a lot of times can be attributed with swollen ankles, varicose veins, and even blood clot after a long period of time. So basically, what happens to sum it all up, really, when we sit for too long, in all honesty, the body kind of goes into a sleep mode. Okay, when what's happening here is our metabolic activity and caloric consumption really slows down. Okay, it actually slows down to approximately 70% less than walking. So I know what you're thinking. Great information, but I don't sit that long, right? It doesn't happen to me. That's what I thought. Okay, that's what I thought. So let's map it out here, maybe. Okay. Try to break down a day. So we sit when we eat breakfast, we sit when we eat lunch, we sit when we eat dinner. Okay, we'll say breakfast is about 15 minutes, right? Travel time to work, for the sake of argument, we'll just go with Stats Canada. They're saying that it's generally 25 minutes or so is what Canadians travel time to work. Okay, that's fair. Office work day, in an 8-hour office, I don't know, 80%? Does that seem pretty fair that you're sitting down 80%? Lunch, travel time home, dinner, leisure time. Depends, I guess. If you have kids, if you don't have kids, 1 hour to anywhere to the rest of your night. But, I don't know, watching TV for an hour, that's not that bad, is it? Right? It's barely a show. That actually adds up to almost 9.5 hours. I was kind of surprised by that. I didn't think I'd sit that long. 9.5 hours. And it's actually close, believe it or not. It's close to Stats Canada. So the average for the Canadian is 9.7 hours. And what that adds up to is basically then they surveyed from 20 to 79 years of age. They surveyed the group and they found that Canadians are spending 69% of their waking hours sedentary. So if you don't believe me, I would say just calculate your own sit time. Okay, it doesn't really get scary until you run your own situation, right? 9.5 hours came up pretty easily. Remember, I'm only watching TV for an hour, right? I haven't really started my Breaking Bad marathon yet and been glued to the TV for 4 or 5 hours a night. So that 1 hour really can be a big difference maker, right, in watching TV. If you want to go to the next step, all I want to say here is that you can buy these fancy gadgets. They're out there. They're more than just an exercise tool. That was my point of showing this, right? These watches nowadays that tell you when you should eat, sleep, breathe, laugh, smile, and whatnot, right? These devices are out there gearing our lifestyle. But they actually spit out some important information, or they can. They can show you your calories, your steps, your heart rate, the floors. You know how many floors you've gone up and down in a day? They're actually tracking your active minutes, right? So again, there's more than just a fitness tool, right? You might want to consider going this route just to track your own data. So that stuff's out there. I know a lot of time was spent explaining the back and how the back works. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but to break it down really quickly for you is that our spine has this natural S curvature. Okay, this is our natural curvature. This is where we want to be in this posture. Why? Because it allows our spine to work like a coiled spring. It absorbs shock, it maintains balance, and it allows for range of motion. Right? We have this nice S curvature. If we were all to stand up and run our hands down our back, we would actually find our lower back. You can find that indentation. I would question if you're sitting down, can you find your lumbar region? For most, probably not, especially when we're sitting like that. You want to be in this upright posture, okay? Why do we want to maintain natural curvature? I want you to think of natural curvature as proper posture. Why? whole whack of reasons. It keeps our bones and joints in correct alignment, decreases abnormal wearing, decreases stress, it ensures that the muscles are being used efficiently, and it prevents fatigue. If the muscles are being used efficiently, it allows the body to use less energy. So in that sense, we're preventing fatigue because we're not wasting energy on unnecessary movements or maintaining balance. So, what happens next? Now we're in this upright posture. We start the day, we come to work, standing up, life is good. What happens next? Right? What happens next? Well, we sit down. So what happens with sitting? As soon as you sit down, there's immediate flexion in the spine. Okay? There's a forward curvature of our spine, and the lumbar section is gone. The muscles are forced to stabilize this unstable posture. The lack of movement results in static contractions, which I talked about, leads to tense, sore muscles. What is this graphic showing? I mean, this is a nice simple thing, just kind of showing the lumbar region versus the flattening of the lumbar region. All these numbers and stuff, all you really need to know is here is we sat down, we brought our hips up to 60 degrees, right? And what happens? We have a 90-degree chair, so somebody's sitting upright. In this example, they've lost 30% of the curvature. So the back is flexed, it's flattened out 30 degrees, not 30%, 30 degrees, okay? Long story short, your back flattens out. So, you're going to say to me, well, I need to sit down, right? That's the reality. We need to sit down. You're sitting down right now. So I need to sit down. So how do we make the best of the worst situation here? Well, the key here is really you have to try to ensure good sitting posture. What is good sitting posture? A posture that still allows those three natural curvatures in your spine. Our elbows are at our sides. Our shoulders are relaxed. Avoid slouching. We do a lot of office ergo assessments, and a lot of times I say to people, sit back in your chair. Relax. I know relax and work don't really go in the same sentence, but relax. And I find a lot of times as soon as I say to somebody, relax, guess what they do? They drop the shoulders. Their body, it's almost automatic. We do relax. We sit back in the chair. We use the back of the chair. So if you're a forward sitter or you're kind of want to hover over your keyboards, that's your biggest habit to break. Get a coworker to strap some duct tape or Gorilla tape around you, but sit back and relax. Right? Have them wheel you out at the end of the day, but sit back in that chair. That's actually a really hard habit to break. A lot of people put their coats on their office chairs or their jackets, and then that right there prevents them from sitting all the way back. And it's something so small and Mickey Mouse, like your puffy jacket, your winter coat, that's preventing you from sitting back in the chair. You must have lumbar support. Absolutely must have lumbar support, and it must be adjustable. What do I mean by adjustable? The up and down, that's key. That's key. I mean, it kills me when I'm doing an assessment, somebody says their back is hurting them, and they didn't even know that the lumbar goes up and down. So you got to have adjustability. Use the rocker feature. What am I talking about? I'm talking about that feature on the chair that allows you to go into your executive lean position, right? Use the rocker feature. Why? Okay, really quickly, most chairs will have two options. The backrest goes like this, or the whole chair goes like an L. So once I adjust the height and the lumbar is supported, if I use the rocker feature, the whole chair goes like that. It doesn't alter the height. If you're reclining with just this, as you recline, that lumbar pillow is moving. It's moving up and down. Your lumbar is not supported. So arguably, you can put your feet up on the desk and probably fall asleep staring at the stars, and your lumbar is still supported because you've taken the chair and you've pushed it into the full L position or the rocker feature. So that's a really handy feature to have on your chair. When you're working, lock it, get in a position, but throughout the day, use that rocker feature. It's going to offer some form of movement, right, in your position. So that's a really important feature to have. If you're not using the lumbar support or you're sitting in a flat back chair, okay, I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but flat back chairs, right, this is what's happening, right, that forward position of the lumbar curvature. The bottom of the S doesn't exist. So you really need to fill that lumbar position. So obviously in a sitting position, in an office chair, but also when driving, here's a consideration as well. Okay, so we have a common driving position where now we've shifted our hips forward on the seat and we're not utilizing the backrest in that chair. Okay, another common example, right, are like borderline road rage guy that's in a rush to get home, right? That clinch position. Now we have the opposite scenario. The top of the S curvature is gone, right? The shoulders, the hunching of the shoulders. So again, sit back, relax. Again, relax while driving. I don't know, don't get too relaxed, okay? But again, that mentality of relax, sit back, use the chair. Some additional points. I didn't really know where to throw these in on the slides, but I thought they're worth noting. Okay? Did you know spine stability is compromised following prolonged sitting? Strenuous exertion, such as lifting, should be avoided following prolonged sitting. We actually need to incorporate stand time or a dynamic time before we attempt strenuous activity. That becomes really difficult in many jobs, right? Because stand time, dynamic time, aka wasted time, right? That's how it's viewed. So now you're telling me somebody needs some extra time? Ugh. Can't buy extra time anymore these days. But what about delivery or regular manual material handling jobs? What about, the guy delivering the case of beer that sat and drove and got out and now lifts 50 pounds or more, right? A lot of times in delivery jobs, these things, time doesn't exist. So what do? Right? We need movement before we perform that lift. Remember earlier I said after prolonged sitting, even a mundane activity can trigger, a serious injury. So let alone lifting heavy. The next point, this one is neat. Did you notice, okay, as a group, did we notice workers recovering from low back injuries or returning to work from an injury are often placed on light duty that commonly involves sitting? Why are we associating sitting with light duty? Right? Oh, I know, your back is sore. Let me help you. No thanks. I'd rather not sit down in this chair, right, following, a return to work after a low back injury. So something to think about. Okay, so let's take a stand against sitting. What do? No sitting at any time. Well, that's not the answer. It's impossible. So I'm not saying never sit down, right? Nor am I saying standing all day is the answer. The key really is to understand that we need postural variety. What is that? And really, there's no single ideal sitting position. Okay, we need movement. Changing lumbar postures shifts the load from one tissue to another. It's the only way to minimize the risk of tissue overload. We need variety, we need movement. So what do? We have to develop strategies to ensure variety. How can we incorporate sit, stand, walk into a job, into all jobs, right? So a couple things. To categorize things, we can kind of throw it in these three areas. This is what we'll talk about. So workload planning, workload change, and purposeful breaks. Oof. That's kind of subjective, right? What purposeful breaks mean. So we'll talk about that. Workload planning. What are some tasks that maybe we could do on the move? What are some tasks? So I'll start doing a presentation, right? Not standing here for an hour and talking to you. So constantly moving. So presenting, talking to people. But what are some tasks that we could do on the move? Teleconferencing. Man, I hate those hour, 2-hour calls. I hate those. Absolutely. Why did we buy an earpiece? Teleconferencing, talking on the phone. Yeah. Any other ideas? No ideas. Okay. Phone. Yeah, phone use. Absolutely. Not even the teleconference, but just simple phone use. If you have a wireless headset, make a habit. If you have a window in your office, there you go. At the sign of a phone call, answer the headrest and make a point of looking out the window. That's going to force you to stand up to get out, even if it's a short call. I like this one. Using face-to-face dialogue instead of an email. So rather than shooting my coworker an email to the office, directly next door to me, saying, where do you want to go for lunch today? Maybe I should get up and walk over, right? In today's day and age, we're slowly eliminating face-to-face contact in life, right? Ugh. So, using dialogue, right? Getting up, moving. Job rotation. Everybody knows what job rotation is, right? You go from this job to that job. Well, let's break it down a little bit smaller, and let's think of task rotation. Okay? So rotating between sedentary and non-sedentary tasks. So what does that mean? I have a bunch of stuff to print off, or I have a bunch of, I don't know, we'll use the example of today. Somebody at some point had to print off these packages, and somebody had to put them together, and somebody did that. Do we need to do that? Did I need to do that at my desk, sitting down with the whole stack of everything in front of me? Or maybe could I do it on a higher table? Right? Maybe we had a higher table or counter height. Maybe I could stand over there and I could do that. So I alternated. But I didn't do all those packages in 4 hours. Maybe I went back and forth to my office and I alternated my task. My job stayed the same, but I alternated my task. So really break it down into task rotation. Think of things, at the smaller level. What can we do? Workplace change. So what can change at the workplace? The type of desks. There's your first step, right? The type of desks, tables being used at an individual level, but then also, at more of a global one. And I'll give you the example. So sit-stand desks, right? This is the new trend. This is the new thing that everybody is selling and everybody else is trying to buy or get, right? They're also very expensive. But at the individual level, there you go. A sit-stand desk, right? The same individual, even though she's not sitting properly in that chair. But anyways, maybe she's about to stand up. We'll give her the benefit of the doubt. She goes to a sit and a stand height. But these things are pretty fancy, right? We're not cranking them. We're not calling the maintenance department in to come lift up my table. We're hitting a simple button that's got a preset. It's going to go up and down. It's going to memorize your height. For your height and your height, it's going to memorize it. It's going to save that height. That's easy. That's very easy. It's made it very simple. There's a great option, in the office setting. There's also kind of these retrofit pop-up styles, right? You can sit and stand within seconds. I've never used this. I've never seen this. I'm not trying to sell this. But those are another option. So you have pop-up styles that, apparently work. I mean, in theory, they make sense. You can sit and you can stand in the same scenario. So at the individual level, the products are there. Let's go bigger. Right? How many people have this chair at their boardroom or their office, right? The nice big executive leather, right? Chair. Right? You're important in the organization when they buy you a big chair. Or they hate you because they know that chair is terrible, right? So why do we need to sit in these chairs? Why do we need to sit in these chairs for long periods of time? Why do we need to be in them for meetings? Why not do that? Why not stand in a meeting? Why not have counter height tables? Why not have small, I don't want to say a coffee table, but why not have a small, round, high table in the workplace? So if I need to talk to you, rather than sitting down or hovering over your desk, maybe you and I can go stand at this table and look at a document or look at, like a lot of times in workplaces that are reviewing blueprints and stuff, it's actually a nice setup because they know that people have to read these massive documents, so they give them a high counter. They give them a huge workspace, and people can spread things out, and they can stand, and they can look at it. But why not do that for small things, right? Why not review smaller documents at these kind of tables? These are simple things, So you would question that within the workplace. Try to drive change in that scenario. Think about your proximity to things, equipment, right? We live in this day and age where it's like, more is better, bring everything to me so I don't even have to move. Right? We go do an office assessment and the person's got printers, scanners, all sorts of technology and stuff. I almost said a bad word. I didn't though. All this stuff on their desk. Perfect. Now you never have to move. Why? Right? What's wrong with a centralized printer? What's wrong with getting up, walking down the hall to grab something off the printer? When you're super busy and you're in the moment, it's probably a nuisance. I agree 100%. But your body will thank you later. So think about these things. Do I need all this stuff in my office? Do I need that shredder so that I can go, got it, shredded it, right? Why not walk somewhere? Do we need everything within arm's reach? The other thing I'm going to say is personal items, touchy subject, right? But water, snacks. Everybody's on this health craze and drinking water, but did I need that Collagen jug on my desk? I might be better off walking. I might be better off, and this is something I've done. I drink a ton of water throughout the day, but I limit what I'm filling. So I have a small glass or a normal glass on my desk. Well, guess what? I'm blowing through those, and I'm constantly going to the lunchroom to fill it up. I'm getting my break, right? Versus bringing a whole jug. I might drink a pitcher of water by the end of the day, but if I had that pitcher right there, I'm never moving. So you ask yourself, do I need these items? Maybe the apple is better left in the fridge and me walking to get that apple than it is on my desk. You know, same thing with restrooms, right? You know, how close are you? It's always like an advantage of who's got the office close to the washroom or close to the door. Again, the guy that's furthest away is probably at the advantage. All right? Stairwell access. There were some studies done. You know this, we hear this a lot. Take the stairs, walk, park at the back of the lot. I mean, these are legitimate ideas that Brenda's going to touch on later. But the thing is a lot of studies were done, and they were saying people aren't using the stairs. You know, I'm not talking about 15 flights of stairs, but one flight of stairs, something like that. And a lot of times they say why, and they look into it and they say, well, stairway access, maybe there's proper lighting. It doesn't look pretty, right? Nobody wants to go down that stairwell or staircase. So you can improve that. You can enhance it, and you can, shut down the elevator temporarily. You can force people to go down the stairs, but you yourself can use the stairs as well, right? And it's simple barriers, like maybe the stairwell door is heavy to push, and it bangs, and it makes a loud noise, and people in the office don't like it when people use that. Like, these are comical things that prevent people from getting movement from using the stairs. But that's the big one. That's an easy one to start using. So, on the topic of purposeful breaks, what are we talking about? Well, there's a rest break. In your mind, what is a rest break? Okay, maybe at the core of the definition, to me, rest break is this. Go sit down, have a coffee, go talk to a coworker, right? Versus a dynamic break. It's the same thing got done. We still chit-chatted about the weekend or what's going on this weekend, and we still got our coffees, right? But now we had a dynamic break versus a rest break. And that's kind of that shift that we got to do mentally, shift from rest break. When I hear rest, I think on the couch, rest, shut the body down, right? We need to shift gears here and think dynamic break. So you have to remember this is so important, is that a true rest break consists of the opposite activity. Why? Because we want to reduce the imposed stressors, whatever the stressors were. So sitting in this chair and the stressors, we need a break that's opposite. For sedentary or stationary individuals, the emphasis needs to be on dynamic, not rest. Okay, so dynamic break. What do we need? We need periodic posture breaks. So, okay, really, really quickly, if you have a hard time or you're busy and you always forget, and you're a person that admits, I always forget to stand up, download apps. There's software. At the end of this presentation, it's on the resources. There's free devices that are great. You download them, you set the time, it pops up, it locks your screen out for 30 seconds or a minute or whatever you've installed, and it forces, a timeout from the computer, so to speak. They're free, they're available, right? Another good one that came up a lot of times in research with studies was that they developed a walking group at the workplace. So when people had 10 minutes, when they had a 15-minute breaks, they'd buddy up and go circle the parking lot, as comical as it seems, versus going to the lunchroom and sitting down again. Okay? So stand and stretch when tired. I like this one. Make it automatic every time you yawn. You might not want to admit this to your employer, but how many times in the day do you yawn? Right? People get tired at work, do they yawn? So make this a habit. As soon as you yawn, let's stand up and stretch. So that being said, I'm going to show you one simple tool. I mean, we could spend a day talking about stretches and exercises and whatnot. I'll give you the one best piece of advice. Everybody ready? We're going to stand up as a group. We're gonna stand up. All those people at home, I'm gonna ask you to stand up. Anyways, we're gonna stand up as a group. We're just gonna wait for 10, 20 seconds have already passed by. Best stretch you can do, raise both arms straight up, look up at the ceiling, and pretend that you're pushing up on the ceiling. Inhale, take a deep breath in. Inhale, both arms, raise them up. Raise them up, big breath in, looking at the ceiling, and then exhale slowly. And there you go, and sit down. What was that exercise? In all honesty, what was that exercise? You've basically just you've extended your lower back through a gentle and full progressive lumbar extension. At the core of stretching, that was a simple, gentle exercise, right? Versus the person that goes, oh, it's break time to stretch, you know? And everybody does these things, or you know, do a nice twist on the back. Scary stuff. Simple thing. Make it automatic. Every time you yawn, get up and do that. What have you done from a mental perspective? You actually fired neurons in the brain that enhances alertness. So if you get flack from your employer, what are you doing? You tell them, I'm actually increasing my productivity. Because when I sit down, there is research, and if you need that to sell the idea, call me. But there is research to say that people are 60% more productive when they sit down from a rest break like that. Okay? So your focus is there. You fired up the brain. You feel refreshed. If you still can't do that, I've got a really simple formula for you. Ready? Drink a ton of water and even more coffee. Why? Because you will be running to the washroom. And all jokes aside, in a sedentary job, in an office job, walking to that washroom is the complete opposite. Just walking, getting up and walking. Okay, so again, here's some resources. There are those free downloads you can use. There's some information on the sit-stand stations. And I guess I'll leave you with that. The only thing I ask is get up every hour. Get up and move. Okay, if you're moving because your body is telling you to moving, it's already too late. Your body is triggering something because there's been an imposed stress. So be proactive and move before the body tells you to move. How's that? Does anybody have any questions?
We have a couple online. Are we doing a bit of time?
Sure.
So the first question is there a minimum recommended time after prolonged sitting before a strenuous exertion?
Oof. Well, so it's going to depend on the exertion in terms of how much we're lifting and the weights associated with it. There isn't one time frame that I can throw out there that I know of, but it would depend on the task. Yeah.
The next one is, where are all the stats coming between seating and death and health risks?
Whew. Where's all those things?
Well,
CTV.
Okay.
Yeah, like the references for these things, I mean, they're coming from scientific journals that now are picked up and posted all over media through there. Like those images that I showed do have their sources on there. But if you can't go far without catching CTV News' documentary on sitting or their snippet on sitting, and they're going to show that the link to death is right there. But a lot of the information, so people know, are studies done, and they do tie it to TV watching, right? And they track people's times, how long they spend in the evenings watching TV or just laying down and being sedentary, and that's what they're pulling that data from.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes. Any questions from the audience at all for Nick? Okay, hold on. I got to bring the mic to you so people online can hear you.
I've heard that sitting on an exercise ball versus an office chair is better for you because it activates your core. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts were that I hope nobody asked that question.
Mine too.
Since the question came up, I would say no deal. So what's happening is that in theory, and what I've shown you is that when people sit down, the body goes into sleep mode. So now here are these gadgets and gizmos that will say the ball falls under that category that here we're going to fire up the muscles or we're going to activate the core. For every good intervention, there's a bad outcome as well. So the risks associated with sitting on a ball are huge. The biggest one here, aside from falling, but the biggest one is that your upper body is free to move. So it's very easy if somebody calls my name or if my stapler is over there, it's very easy to now get way more trunk twisting introduced in your day than maybe was there with a chair because you would have swiveled or you would have stood up. So there are a lot of risks associated, but the idea of, you're going to activate your core, I would say to avoid it, but I mean if somebody's adamant on getting the ball in there for short periods of time, okay, but the thing to remember here is that, professional athletes aren't able to train their core for 8 hours. Why do you think maybe we can suddenly, right? So that even though you're activating your core, at some point it's going to be too much. The people that have gotten rid of a chair and get this ball, I think is a very slippery slope. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Just in addition to the ball question, on the OCAL website, if you go to ocal.on.ca, click Clinics, Sudbury, in the news. There is an article that I published on, it's called Having a Ball at the Office, and it highlights more examples of what Nick was talking about. Or you can just Google, quote, Having a Ball at the Office, Trevor Shell, and that should bring it up as well. Now I'd like to introduce the next speaker, who is Brenda Malott, also out of our Windsor clinic as well. So, Brenda?
My mic on? No. Is my mic on? Check. Is it on? Oh, sorry. Okay, sounds different up here. Okay, good morning. I'd just like to thank Trevor and Sudbury Clinic for inviting us up here today. This is a couple firsts for me today. It's my first time to Sudbury, and it's my first time doing this presentation. This is something I've wanted to talk about and do a presentation on for quite a while. And actually, I talk about this subject when we do office ergonomics. So Nick was talking a lot about sitting and changing your habits for sitting. And I'm going to tell you that that's a lot easier to do or a lot harder to do than it sounds. We are creatures of habit. So I want to talk about how our brain is connected to our movement. So for the most part, ergonomists, when we do work, we look at the physical side of ergonomics. So we look at lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling. How much weight do you have to lift? How are you doing that? What posture are you in? How much reaching do you have to do when you're doing that? When you're pushing and pulling, how far do you have to push it? What are the forces required? Reaching, how far do you have to reach? What posture is the arm in? Standing, walking, sitting, gripping. So typically that's what we look at. And from a design perspective, that's what they look at. So there's a program that Ford uses. They have this virtual reality tool that they can use to design the lines that they're going to build 2 years from now. And it's all done on a computer. They have a program. The problem is it's not truly incorporating the brain side of it. It's looking at the physical side. So there's another area of ergonomics called cognitive. So this is the definition from the IEA. It's concerned with the mental processes such as perception, our memory, our reasoning, and motor responses that affect our interactions. So our interactions with the elements in our system. So the cognitive side, unfortunately, for the most part, I think we neglect it or we don't understand it. And our brain is connected to that physical side. So I hope what you take away from today is you're going to learn something very new that probably you haven't been in a presentation on before. Our brain, so it was interesting. I was watching Nick up here present, and I do the same thing. When I present, you'll notice I move my hands around a lot. I have a motor program for presenting, and that's part of it. I don't think about doing it, I just do it. Okay? So some movements that we do our brain controls more of. So if you think about precision movement, so think about how your hands move in comparison to your legs. So this is precision, this is gross motor movement. Okay, it doesn't require a lot of neural input, but we have a lot of muscle here. But you don't need a lot of nerve input to do that. It's a pretty simple movement. This, however, is not very simple. So the brain's going to control more of this than that. And I've got a visual. So why should we care about this? Because unfortunately, if we don't consider this part of it, it could have implications for how we design jobs, the training we do. So the one thing Dwayne was talking about was proper lifting. How many of you in the workplace train workers on how to lift? How many of you have been involved? Okay, so I'm going to ask the question then. When they did the training, was it you sitting down and them telling you this is how you lift, you had the pictures, you squat, you keep your back straight? Is that how they did it for you? Or did they actually have you do it? My mouth's really dry. It's dry in here. Okay, so we're going to talk about why it's important that you don't just sit and watch and that workplaces don't provide. That's the only training they're going to give you on how to lift properly. So it has implications for when you're making recommendations and making changes. So whether you use an engineering control versus an administrative control. So if in the workplace you decide, well, we can't reduce how much somebody's lifting, we're going to put in an administrative control. We're going to train workers how to do that properly. This has huge implications. I'm going to tell you, huge implications for that, okay? If you have injured workers may have different motor programs because now they move differently. Think about someone who maybe has severe carpal tunnel or actually has had an amputation. Now they have to use their other hand. They're going to have to change their brain in order to do that. And ages of workers. When you have really young workers coming in, part of how you control movements is based on your experience. So the older you get, the more experience you have with doing things, okay? So that's actually a great opportunity. When you have a new worker come in and you're going to train them how to do a job, I would say it's really critical that you now train them to do it the right way from the get-go. So if you have a job that requires some skill, and you know you have two workers that you can choose from to train that person. One person, if you watch them do the job, they do it very differently from a physical perspective than another worker. I'm going to give you an example of this. I went to a greenhouse in Leamington, and there was a task where the workers, it was a tomato, and they had to, every day, this is all these workers did, was they lowered the vines, because they have to lower it so they can pick the tomatoes. One worker was doing it this way. He's up on the machine, and he was doing it this way. He had his arms up. The other worker was doing it this way. Completely different postures. And I said, you probably don't want this gentleman to show new workers how to do it, because he's developed this program for doing it that way, and that's how he's going to train other people, okay? And then aging workers. I'll tell you, the older we get, the more we've done things a certain way, makes it harder. And I'm not just saying that, it's a fact. Okay? So if you recognize after today, Nick was talking about sitting, if you recognize now, you know what, I really don't sit properly in my chair, it's not going to be simple to change. I'll tell you, it took me 3 months. I had a sticky on my computer that said, sit back. I had to completely change my program because you don't think about it. When you go and sit down in a chair, how many of you women have your legs crossed? Right. You have a program. You have a motor program. That's a theory. I took this is kind of motor control from university. You have a program. You sit down, you cross your legs. So, and that's hard to change. So we are creatures of habit. We take the path of least resistance. I'm going to give you an example of that. Thank you. I'm going to give an example of lifting and twisting. If you have a job, because again, I've seen this in workplaces where the employer said, well, we've told the workers not to twist. We've told them to pivot with their feet because that's the safest way to do it. I'm going to tell you, unless that's the path of least resistance, people aren't going to do that, right? If it's easier for me to just take it from here and twist and put it here, that's the way it's going to be done. Because number one, this takes a lot of energy, right? And you would have to think about it. Every time you did it, you have to pivot. That's how we operate. That's why we can do all the things that we can do and not have to attend and think about everything that we're doing. We'd never get anything done if we had to do that. So you have to really think about that when you're looking at jobs and look at the way people do it. You can't assume that something can be done a certain way unless you actually do it. And understand that there may be reasons. Nobody does things, I don't think, to get hurt, right? There's reasons people do things the way they do. So there's that. So here's the section in your brain. I'm afraid to use the laser because I'm afraid I'll push the wrong button. Oh, see, I did. Oh, back. All right. That's the section in your brain. It's called the primary motor cortex. And it communicates with other areas of your brain, right? It communicates with your vision. It communicates with your proprioception. So when I'm going to go grab this glass, I have a program for that. And it's general. So I know as I come towards the glass, I got to open my hand. I'm not thinking about that. When I grab this glass, the nerves in my finger send information to the motor cortex and tells my brain says, okay, this is how much force you have to use. Because it's measuring, the weight of it. If it's a smooth texture, like glass, it'll say, oh, you got to grip it a little harder. You're not even thinking about that. This is a really high-level unconscious thing that's occurring, okay? So that's the motor cortex. And you can see that the areas, there's a section for somatosensory, but primarily for today, all we're talking about is that motor cortex. Now, next picture is really interesting. So what this picture is, if you were to take that and slice it this way, the next picture is what it looks like. And in that motor cortex, just like every other part of your brain, when I'm moving my left arm, that's being controlled by the right side of my motor cortex. When I do my right hand, it's the left side. Now, look at that picture for a few seconds. Just look at it. What really stands out to you? So what this is showing is how much of that motor cortex is dedicated to different parts of your body. So what stands out to you? The hands. Yep. What else takes up a lot of area in that motor cortex? The face. Okay. Exactly. Because remember I was saying earlier, precision movement? If you think about someone that's had a stroke, think about Dick Clark. Remember Dick Clark had a stroke? What was the one thing he could never really do properly again? Talk. Yep. Now, he could walk. He could move. Because remember I said that area is not dedicated a lot. Your legs don't have a lot of neural input from that section of your brain. It's gross motor. A lot for your hands and your face. And this is what occurs. So we call it the motor homunculus in school. That's what it's termed. And it develops over time, and it differs from one person to the next. It's going to be based on your experiences. How many of you in this room are left-handed? Okay, so for most left-handers, because they're in a right-handed world, they've learned to use the right hand a lot. So you've actually got a pretty good developed left motor cortex for your right hand. Having said that, for us right-handers, I don't know about the majority of you, I do nothing with my left hand. I can tell you right now, the left side of my motor cortex is highly developed for the hand, the right side not so much. Okay? And even if you think about what people do, the brain of an infant, obviously, is going to be very different for the hand, for an infant, compared to the hand of a concert pianist. Imagine how developed. This is why people that are born without limbs or born, they do develop that motor cortex for their feet and their toes. Like they end up getting it becomes highly developed because our brains do adapt. We do adapt to that. So just think of that and remember, the more precision and the more complex, the more you're going to need to use that part of your brain. So how do we learn movement patterns? Walking. So the brain is organized by these subconscious centers of the brain. Okay, your thinking, your vision, your proprioception, and we rely very heavily on feedback to become skilled initially. So that would be the nerve, the proprioception, the visual. If you think of somebody who golfs in here, who's a golfer, that's pretty skillful. Takes you a long time, doesn't it, to learn how to golf and to have a good swing. And in fact, they tell you if you don't go for lessons, you might have a problem later on. Because if you develop bad motor program patterns for golfing, good luck changing it. Swimming is a very hard skill to learn later in life because it does take good movement patterns. So when you develop poor movement habits or you get an injury, that could lead to a change in that pattern through repetition you get this degraded movement and it actually starts to become habitual. So for example, I'm going to use myself. I injured my back and I actually did a little bit of permanent nerve damage down my left leg. I do have a little bit of a limp. Like people ask me all the time, are you okay? Because I have this degraded movement now because of this injury. So that's going to put some limitations on me. And then these patterns can become permanent, which mine is. I can't change it because I have the injury. They'll feel normal, and they will become habitual. Having said that, some things you can change, though. You can change some of your movement patterns, behaviors. Okay, so automatic behaviors. Think about it. You're climbing stairs. Do you go, ooh, I got to raise my foot 7 inches? No, absolutely not. This is why there's building code. Building code says if you're putting stairs in, they have to be, because otherwise, can you imagine having to change your program everywhere you went? We don't do that. Okay, the next step, look at this. Okay, you've got walking and texting. That's why we can multitask. However, if I tried to do that, it wouldn't be good. I'm not a good texter. I haven't become very, adept at doing that, so I could not text and walk. Think about driving. Like, this is why when people start to drive, whether you're 16 or 26 or 36, they don't want you in the car with a bunch of people because you have too many things you have to attend to. How hard are you pushing the accelerator? Are you in the center of the road? Like, it takes a lot of skill. And as drivers, people that have been driving for quite a while, sometimes I think, geez, I can't believe how much I don't think about what I'm doing. But it's good. That's a good thing because now you can attend to everything that's on the road. So it's important that you become very skillful and get really good motor programs for that. A good example, when we went to St. Croix, and you drive, you're in the same vehicle as you would here. You're on the left-hand side driving, but you're on the left side of the road. I couldn't even do it. I couldn't even drive. My brain would not allow for it because I'm thinking it just didn't seem right. Having the cars going this way, being on that side of the road, it really, some people can, again, adapt to that a little more easily. I could not, so I chose not to drive because I didn't think it was going to be safe. And that week we were there were a lot of Americans, Canadians. There were twice we almost got in a head-on because somebody was on the wrong side of the road. So habits. Habits are not just behavioral, meaning, we talk about people that smoke. I want you to know I used to smoke 2 packs a day. I was very habituated into smoking. And you have that nicotine addiction that you have to get rid of. But I'm going to tell you what was the hardest thing for me was the movement pattern behaviors. I used to think, what am I going to do when I'm driving? Because I would smoke a pack from Windsor to Toronto. I seriously did. I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my hands? Because I had these programs. I smoked and I did things like, so I really had to break that. That was the hardest part. The nicotine part was not hard. It was the habit part. That's why I had a coworker ask me about the e-cigarettes. And I thought, but that's the problem. You're breaking that one habit, but you're still keeping the behavioral, like the movement. So we can develop these habits and these patterns. So we get these theory programs in our motor cortex, and in the same way that we develop behaviors. But we're going to strictly kind of talk to the motor behaviors. So when you do something over and over, eventually it's going to become automatic, and that's a good thing. But once it's automatic, once it is, you don't have to attend to it. And so you need to think about this when you have, again, when you have new workers coming in, you can't just throw them on a job. They may not be able to keep up with the line speed. The more skill required, the more time they're going to need, right, to develop good programs. So you have to think about that in the workplace. And you want to hope that they're developing good movement habits. And the advantage of this, again, it allows you to put more brain power into other things. You can multitask. And then the patterns become very unconscious, right? So again, I'm looking at my hand thinking, oh my gosh, I just can't even stop myself from doing it. If you want to change a motor behavior, once it's ingrained, it requires a lot of work to reestablish that. So this is, I read this I researched this a lot, and I think this came out of the motor control textbook that I had. They estimate that it takes 10 times the initial number of repetitions to overwrite an existing pattern. Again, so think about golf. If you've been golfing for 2 years this way and somebody tells you, you know what, you're doing something wrong, now it's going to take you 10 times longer to change that. That's why they say you need to go for golf lessons, because you want to learn it right from the get-go. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard. So it can take up to 300 repetitions to ingrain that new movement pattern. Again, it depends on the complexity. Okay. Now we're going to talk about proper lifting. So if you're going to train workers to lift, and you recognize that people aren't lifting properly, and you know what, the squatting and lifting part, keeping your back straight, that's not so hard to do. You do need to have, the core strength, the back muscles, all of that. However, in a lot of cases, the job doesn't afford you to lift that way. You have to bend over. Well, there's a proper way to do that. There's a proper movement pattern, the way to do that lift, where you have to bend from the hips, you keep your back. When I hurt my back, the physiotherapist had me do many repetitions of lifting properly. So if you're going to do training in the workplace to workers on how to lift properly, you better give them more than a video. You better train them how to do it. You got to ensure they're using the right muscles. It's really complex. And if you have somebody who's been lifting a certain way for 20 years, it's going to be hard. You can't expect people to just be able to change their habits. That's not how we work. So for the time period, so that was the number of repetitions and how long, but this is actually the time. So from the University College in London says anywhere from 18 to 254 days. Again, it depends on the task, the complexity, to change a program. And again, it's going to depend on the difficulty. And what's also really critical is the commitment from the individual, the person. If somebody does not know that they're not sitting properly in the chair, they can't change the habit, right? And you have to commit to it. I have a sit-to-stand workstation, and I have not yet got in the habit of standing a lot. Because, again, you know, you come in the office, you sit down. I've been doing this for 30-something years. I'm going to have to do something to bring that up into my consciousness, because I haven't done that yet. I haven't made that commitment yet. Hide my chair. You know, actually, this is what I'm going to do. I have decided, I've been thinking about it, I'm going to start where, before I leave for work, I'm going to put the desk up. So as soon as I come in, because it's a good time, right? I've driven into work, I've been sitting in my car for 30 minutes, so I'm going to come in, and that's typically when you're answering emails. You're not doing tasks that are really brain intensive. You might be responding. So actually, that's a good time to stand. Sometimes, you know, when you're doing really brain-intensive work, you have to do a lot of thinking, that might be a harder time to stand up. But Nick's right, absolutely, when you're on the phone. That's another habit. It's really hard to do if you haven't somehow cued yourself. How am I going to get myself to do that? You have to think about it, because it's not going to just happen. So, again, the movement patterns for manual material handling has huge implications for training. And this is why, obviously, from an ergonomic perspective, I always say you're better to put engineering controls into place, because those are easier to manage. If you're going to only make proper lifting your control, it's going to be really hard. You're going to have a really hard time with that. If you really, truly want people to do it properly, you're going to have to train them. You're going to have to let them practice and do it over and over again. It's going to take time. So you need to break that unconscious automatic hold that movement or that activity or that behavior has. You have to activate the thinking part of your brain. We had a professor that used to say to us, you know, I'm only here to share information with you. What you choose to do with it is up to you. So now all of you know, if you sit at your desk, you all know now how bad that is for you. Okay, so that's the start. Now you have to do something to make the change. You need to go back and say, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get myself to stand up when I'm on the phone? So, you know, Nick gave you some good ideas, but it can be even uncomfortable. You can cause discomfort physically. I've had people tell me, you know, when I get them to sit up properly, they're like, this is uncomfortable. It actually bothers my shoulders. Yep. That's right, it will, because now you're actually putting your shoulders where they're supposed to be, you're sitting properly, you're using different muscles. So there actually may be a physical discomfort to it. And people need to know that. You need to educate them about that. And obviously even the psychological, right? It's hard we have so many things going on in the day, it's hard for us to say we need to make this a priority and really think about it. So nobody likes to be uncomfortable. So there you go. That was me many years ago, and it took me some time. And look, people don't see themselves. You don't see yourself moving. You don't see yourself. So that's part of it. When we do assessments, honestly, when I do assessments, I take pictures of people so that I can show them, because they don't see themselves, so they don't recognize the postures that they're in. So, yeah, but part of it is I was in denial about needing glasses. I'm not anymore. So they have to recognize it and acknowledge that they need to change. So that's the first. So from a work design side, we need to ensure that the job design is appropriate for our movement patterns. That's where those programs in Michigan 3D or JACK program doesn't necessarily take that into account. It doesn't know from the human side which movement patterns are better, what makes sense. You know, you watch the programs. They've evolved quite a bit, actually. They are starting to try and put that into it. But, you know, let's say I'm going to the line, and here's the computer model. Well, that's not how we do it. We cut across. You know, so it has to make sense. You have to really look at how you're designing the jobs to ensure that people can develop good programs and use good postures, use acceptable forces. Can I tell you right off, when you're gripping, if you put a glove on a worker Do you know that they're going to use three to 5 times more force just by putting a glove on? Because you lose your proprioception. So again, that's not at a conscious level that I'm going to grip harder. You have to, so that the brain can send the right information to the muscles to know how much to grip. So think about that. When you're going to make a worker wear a glove, you better make sure that glove's appropriate, the right size, the right thickness. You don't want to impact all of that. And it has huge implications for force application. Worker training, you want to make sure, again, people are trained to use the correct movement patterns. So right off the get-go, think about that in your training. And then in equipment changes, ensure that you have appropriate time for workers to adapt to changes. Right? It's a whole new program. If it's just easier for somebody, I remember back in the day when they were first putting lifting assists in the Ford, Chrysler, GM, workers didn't want to use them. It was just easier for them. That path of least resistance. It's just easier for me just to grab the thing and take it off the line. You have to give them time to change. Giving positive feedback, right? Utilizing tools. So I always say, having sometimes, if you want somebody to do something a certain way, is put up a visual. We use our vision a lot. So you can do that on the line, right? If you have certain ways you want them to work, that's where the sticky, I'm going to have to put something, sit, stand. I've already thought about it. How am I going to do the visual for myself at work so that I start to use my sit, stand more auditory, and then by doing it over and over. You have to give people the opportunity to do that. So this is just a little program you can download. So for the office, I'll tell you, you would use this program for the first few months, then you wouldn't need it anymore. Now you have a motor program for doing it, and you don't need those tools. I'm going really fast. Okay, that's all right. It's just more time for lunch. Yep.
Lots of time for questions.
Yes.
Are there
Yep.
any questions here in the audience for Brenda? I got the mic. Oh, we got one.
Are you aware of workplaces that have embarked on a training program to teach workers how to maintain lordotic posture when they're doing some manual material handling? And if so, what kind of success they've had?
I don't know. I know that, I've been involved with training workers, and that takes a lot of muscle memory, right? And it takes some muscle development. So if you don't have core strength and you want to maintain that lower, that's the first step. You have to ask, does the person have the physical capabilities to even do that? And then they need to learn the actual movement patterns. So there's 2 parts to that. So you can see it can be complex, right? But I don't know. I've done training. When I've done training, we've actually gone in, and not when I was with OCal, because typically we wouldn't have as much opportunity to do this, but we would actually clip, get a shoelace. People are nodding. And they would clip it. We would clip it to the top of their shirt. We would clip it to the top of their pants. We'd have a little bit of slack, and then we would have them bend over. So, because it stops you from flexing your spine. That's actually what the physiotherapist did with me. But again, as soon as you take that off, now I do it and I would flex my spine. So there's a lot of muscle memory involved in doing it the right way, beyond just even the core strength. Right? You can have a really good, strong, somebody's got great abs, good strong back, and they bend over and don't have the right movement patterns, and they can herniate their disc.
Okay, Brenda, is the micropause tool free of charge?
Yes, that one is. Yep. I think it was, is that? Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah. I guess you could take this, and, obviously part of this is not just work related, but take this into your own lives and recognize that. If you know that there's something you need to do to change it, you know that it could take some time, right? And things that you might need to do to somehow bring that up to the conscious level.
Okay, and someone just commented too that WorkSafe BC also has a free download for micro breaks as well.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I love work safety, see?
I'm just going to take a minute to invite the speakers who have already spoken this morning up. We do have a few minutes before the scheduled break, so I want to open it up to questions for Dwayne, Curtis, and Brenda, and Nick, in case anyone's got some general questions, because I know Dwayne does have to catch a flight before the question period. So, give me the mic, I'll handle the questions.
Yep.
So, any general questions from the audience for any of the speakers?
Not a general, more of a specific question. Is there a tool or something to assist a person such as myself who has shattered their coccyx and fractured their sacrum? So I tend to sit kind of on one butt cheek or the other to accommodate, and I don't have problems down there. Most of them are up here because I'm making weird adjustments.
They have chairs. Where they can cut it out so you don't have any of that pressure.
Okay.
Right? So Ergocentric, for example, is a company. All they do is seating, and they can make a chair. We have a worker, actually, who has that same problem. Yeah. So what they did was they took the chair and they cut the foam out of that area so there's absolutely no pressure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
There's a question here. Is there?
Can you read in?
Oh, yeah.
I don't have my mic turned on. Is there a specific definition of prolonged? Why did it speak this morning, so?
I'm assuming by that they're referring to sitting, or this could be anything. It's probably not specified. No, I'm not aware of a definition of a specific definition of prolonged. If I had to throw out a number, I don't know. I would say anything greater than 10 minutes. That could be considered prolonged. Nick, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I think it's tied to the task that you're doing. If I'm going to speak to the sitting thing from the research and the recommendations, if we go at Canadian Standards Association, CSA, we're recommending at 30 minutes that somebody gets a 30-second minimum postural relief. But again, that 30 minutes, that's a pretty short interval to constantly stop yourself, and 30 seconds is a bit of a short interval. So sometimes it gets stretched out to basically an hour. It used to kind of seem like break up the task or alter the task at an hour interval, and that's kind of been shaved down to even a 45-minute interval now in terms of sitting, and at least in the office research, that's what they're saying, is at the 45-minute mark, it's already defined as prolonged.
Reminds me of the question, how much repetition is too much? You know what I mean? You're right, it depends.
Or an even different question is, what is the definition of repetitive?
Exactly.
We get into all the time as well.
Yep.
Okay, Curtis, I have a question for you. How can we get the Excel document for plugging in pain severity and frequency?
If people are looking for that actual Excel spreadsheet tool, it's on our website. I believe it's under the resources under software programs. It's just a downloadable Excel spreadsheet tool, and there's also a PDF document with instructions on how to use it properly. If you have any issues, you can contact or email me directly. My email address is on the website under the Hamilton Clinic page.
For Dwayne, what is the best way to rest the lower back, i.e. sit, lie down, etc.?
That's, again, dependent upon what you're resting it from. Basically, relieving it from whatever situation it was in would be a change of posture. So there's no best way, because if you're laying down in whatever position you're laying down in for an extended period of time, changing that posture will rest it, give it a break from the same posture. So that's kind of back along the lines of the questions that they were answering in terms of its task specific and stress specific more so. Whatever is going to put it in a different posture than it's in, and bring it as close to neutral as possible.
I have a small saying that I just give to people. Standing's better than sitting, walking's better than standing. So it's always about dynamic. We're designed to move. That's why we have all the muscles we have. Think about it. Largest muscle groups in your body, your legs, your glutes. Because it's about locomotion. So you could, if we all trained to it, we could walk all day. It's repetitive, however, it's low force, it's dynamic, it's neutral position. Walking is the perfect motion. Lying, we lie down at night because we have to sleep, but in the end, it unloads our back, but it's static. You're not moving. I don't know about anyone else. I have a back problem, and I'm the worst when I get out of bed in the morning. Once I get moving, I'm good. If I sit for prolonged periods, or anyone at my table back there has seen, I need to stand up. Sitting's really hard for me for prolonged periods. We already answered that one.
I think the more that you're exposed to ergonomists, the more you'll find that their answer is always, it depends.
Okay, I've got another question here, or a statement, I'm not sure which. Prolonged sitting is more than 5 minutes. Is there any literature to support this? Nick, I think that would fall towards you.
Prolonged sitting is more than
5 minutes, question mark. Is there any literature to support?
I didn't see that. I haven't seen 5 minutes. I haven't seen 5 minutes as an interval. I don't know if I presented that.
No.
It was 5 minutes. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, okay.
So, no.
Okay, now the next question. Since deep squats result in spinal flexion for many people, what other lifting strategies exist to lift objects from the floor?
Well, you can bend, but you have to ensure that you're not flexing your spine.
I would respond with, why are you lifting from the floor?
Good.
Typical ergonomics question or answer? Now, I mean, that being said, though, there are alternate lifting techniques that people can employ. I mean, we've got the golfer's lift, where basically, you know, it's like someone going out golfing. They drop something on the floor. They got their hand on their club. They're bending down, bringing it up. If you're lifting something like, say, a bag of topsoil from the ground, you employ something called the tripod lift. You're down on one knee. You slide the bag up. You're using your leg to bring it up while keeping your back straight. So there are alternate lifting techniques depending on the scenario. But as Curtis said, why would you ever do that? If I have a pallet of topsoil, why would I not set it on top of something like other pallets so I'm actually pulling the bags off at a neutral standing position, which, as Dwayne said, the ideal standing height or lifting height is between standing knuckle and standing elbow. So you try and position as much as you can in that area. Okay, that's all the questions I have online. Any other questions from the audience before we take a break? No? Okay, so we're going to take a break. We're going to come back at 1:15. So until then, have a good lunchtime.
12:15?
12:15 our time.
12:15. 12:15 Eastern.
So welcome back. I hope everyone had a great lunch break. I'd now like to introduce, originally Brendan Coffey was supposed to do this out of our Hamilton office, but Brendan has become ill, so Curtis has nicely offered to fill in for Brendan to talk about our physical demands description handbook. Everyone in the audience has a copy of the PDD book, and those online, as part of your handouts, you also have a copy of the link to the PDD book to download it as well. So, Curtis?
Thanks, Trevor. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, good. Yes, we pulled a little bit of a Houdini, and I'm covering for Brendan, who's ill. But both Brendan and I worked on this project together, so I'm very well familiar with it. Essentially how this project came about was a collaboration with Queen's University with Steve Fisher in their kinesiology department. And Brendan was actually one of his master's students at the time. So they were interested in looking at paramedics and seeing if they could train or educate paramedics on how to complete physical demands descriptions for themselves. So rather than requiring external consultants like ergonomists to come in and do it for them, they were interested in researching whether they could essentially train workers to complete PDDs for themselves. And they contacted me about our, at that point, dated physical demands description handbook. And so we took it as an opportunity to rewrite and update the handbook. Now, you might wonder why we call them physical demands descriptions and not physical demands analysis. You may be more familiar with the term PDA, but we intentionally did that. In the handbook, you'll see a description as to why. Ultimately, there's no analysis being performed. We're not looking at level of risk. We're not looking at likelihood of occurrence. We're simply looking at describing what the physical demands are. So there's no analysis involved, and so that's why we intentionally have called it the Physical Demands Description Handbook. Here's the link for those online if you're interested in downloading a PDF version of it. And ultimately, what is a physical demands description? It's a systematic procedure to quantify and evaluate all of the physical demands of essential and non-essential tasks related to a particular job. I'm assuming a lot of people have some exposure to this in different contexts, and we'll look at what some of the examples, who would do it and why it would be used. But that's the overall sort of framework that we're working from when we're talking about physical demands descriptions. In terms of who completes them, you'll get a lot of variety here, both in terms of the templates that are used, as well as who's completing physical demands descriptions. Internally within an organization, it could be a supervisor, it could be a joint health and safety committee member, it could be health and safety staff, it could be an ergonomist internally if they have one. Ideally, it's going to be someone with expertise and the appropriate training to complete them. I would strongly encourage people not to just go out and start completing physical demands description without the appropriate training or education. It may be outside experts, such as hired consultants, and we really encourage people to investigate what credentials they may have when they're promoting themselves as offering physical demands descriptions. And we strongly encourage that they're CCPEs, so Canadian Certified Professional Ergonomists. What are PDDs used for? There's lots of different uses currently. And each organization is a little bit different. It could be communicating job requirements to healthcare professionals. So a lot of times this comes down to injured workers, where you're communicating with, say, their family doctor, for example, and their doctor really doesn't know what they do on a day-to-day basis. So it's oftentimes it's educating the family physician on why this is a work-related injury, or what tasks I have to perform at my job if I'm looking at going back, following even surgery, for example. That's completely not work-related. It could be for providing data for adjudication purposes in terms of WSIB claims. It could be for trying to, at a high level, identify where there could be issues that need to be investigated further. So it might simply be a sort of high-level scan of all the jobs, and based on what you're documenting, you might say, "Ooh, this seems bad. We should probably look into this further." And it could be for providing information for hiring and training, depending on if it's a very physical job, what exactly those requirements would be, and what potential recruits would need to be able to perform. So who relies on PDD information? Sort of touched on a little bit of that, but it could be internal, related to human resources. It could be health and safety, looking at particular things, occupational health, supervisors trying to understand what tasks are being performed at what areas of a particular facility. It could be engineers looking at engineering changes or redesign of something, and they want to know how the work is performed. All could be really useful information related to that. From an external perspective, like I mentioned, it could be physicians, physiotherapists, any sort of healthcare provider that's working with someone that has an injury or is recovering or is going back to work and trying to have a good understanding of what they need to do on a day-to-day basis in their job. A lot of times these are reviewed with WSIB adjudications. So someone submits a WSIB claim, the WSIB will ask for physical demands, what they still refer to as PDA, but I'm working with them on that, hoping they'll change. They request as much information as they can about what's performed in a job so that they can determine whether they're going to approve the claim or deny the claim. Could be insurance providers as well outside of the WSIB, so more of a private sector type environment. But ultimately, they're all looking for information about what is being performed by this worker that we're looking at or treating, et cetera, and does it give adequate information for us to really comprehend what the job is, what it entails. So here's a little bit of a complicated diagram from a published paper, just like looking at how this often takes place. So you'll assess the job, so perform a PDD, and you'll assess the functional capacity of a particular individual, an injured worker, for example, returning to work. And you'll try and compare the two and say, based on the restrictions provided by a particular healthcare provider and the job demands, is there a match, right? And that's often where it ends. If a restriction says no lifting greater than 10 pounds or something to that effect, and the physical demands description, you have to lift 15 pounds, they simply say, nope, you can't do the job. I would argue you should be digging a little deeper and saying, how can we modify the job or change it so that they can perform that task, or maybe reduce the weight so they can perform the task, etc. But oftentimes that's not what's done. It's simply looking at, do these two match, and if not, too bad. So you can see up here, it might involve reducing demands or making job improvements. It could involve improving capacity, so providing an assist device like a lifting device, something like that. And ultimately other things can take place as well. If the capacity is less or greater than the demand, then certain things can take place. So are we assessing different pain and injury reports? Are other people being exposed to the same type of work? What MSD hazards are present, or musculoskeletal disorder hazards, that we can be addressing or reducing or eliminating so to prevent risk of injury. But as you can see here at the bottom, the ideal goal is a successful matching. So we found a job that clearly has all of the physical aspects documented. We have someone with some restrictions, and it still lies within, the restrictions still fall within the documented physical demands. And so they can perform that job. That's the success story. What all of this comes from a legal perspective, is the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, specifically talking about the physical demands and functional abilities of an injured worker. So it says, when requested to do so by an injured worker or the employer, a health professional treating the worker shall give the board, the worker, and the employer such information as may be prescribed concerning the worker's functional abilities. So that's from the individual perspective. The required information must be provided on the prescribed form. But the whole point of that is to look at those functional abilities and see if they can perform the task of a job when they're returning. So there's lots of different problems that can come about with this. I've touched on some of them, but what exact information is required from the employer? It's not really clear, so you get a lot of variation between what's documented, how it's described, and what's provided, and ultimately how that information is used. And then also, do they even have physical demands descriptions? A lot of times it'll be a case where it's simply a job description in sentence form, describing what they do, but there's no real quantified information or measurements involved at all. They could be outdated. They could be inaccurate. They could be from a job that's changed in the last year, and so what's on paper is completely different from what's actually being performed by a group of workers currently. So here's all kinds of different examples of physical demands that we see on a daily basis in our office. And you can see some come in sort of chart form with just X's. And you can see at the top in this example, you have a frequency during the shift. So things like never, rare, infrequent, occasional, frequent, constant. We kind of touched on this morning. What is the definition of each of these? I have no idea. Sometimes they'll have a range and say things like 0 to 33%, 33 to 66%, etc. That is still a huge range. If I'm doing something 1% of the day versus 32% of the day, that's a significant difference. So it's far too vague and far too generalized. Here might be another one, so it's more of a checkbox form. But again, it's not giving quantified information in a detailed way. Here's another example. Right? So there's all kinds of these out there. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these in your day-to-day jobs, and they're not that helpful. They're not helpful from an adjudication perspective. They're not helpful from a return-to-work perspective, and they're not helpful from a prevention perspective in terms of identifying what the real hazards are or the real physical demands of a job are within a particular circumstance. So see, there's just endless versions. There's no standardized template. So the big thing that we've tried to do with this new handbook is reflect the job, not the worker. So a lot of times in these physical demands descriptions or PDAs, what we'll also see is things like percentage of back flexion or the certain type of posture being used. But that's completely dependent on the person that's doing the job. for the way I would perform a certain task is going to be different from someone that's 6'6". So my back flexion, for example, would be completely different than somebody that's taller, as an example. So you can't have individualized or postural information in a physical demands description because that's unique to the person. So a lot of times they're relying on subjective information, and that's very problematic. What we would like to see is absolute measurements. So we want objective measures that apply to the job and not to an individual. So as you can see there, it reduces generalizations and a lot of the guesswork associated with a lot of documents that we see on a day-to-day basis. So in the photos here as an example, you can see two individuals, so one guy performing a task on the left and another one performing something on the right, completely different postures. Let's just assume that they're doing the exact same thing on both sides of the vehicle. Very different technique, very different way they're doing it. But if we describe that you have to perform a certain task like fastening a nut, for example, at this height, at this distance, for this amount of time, that's going to be done regardless of who does it and how they do it. So here's a high-level overview of the process that we're encouraging workplaces to take. And this is actually in the front of your handbook that was handed out to you for those in person. And you can see that there's sort of three main stages that we want people to be considering. One being prepare for the PDD. So think like determine where PDDs need to be done. Where do you have any in your organization currently? When was the last time they were checked or updated? Has something changed in a process that requires you to perform an update? And there's lots of different considerations for that. In the yellow circle there, you can see all kinds of different considerations that might trigger a requirement for an immediate update. Others you may plan to review and update on an annual basis, quarterly basis, biannual, whatever that frequency is for updating your PEDs. But ultimately, you should be doing that on a regular basis, as well as having some key triggers in place. If there were significant changes, it should be updated immediately. Then in the second section, we talk about observation and data collection. So exactly identifying all of the tasks, how often they're performed, and taking all of the appropriate measurements. And we get into how to measure appropriately, what tools you should be using when performing those measurements, how many measurements you should be taking, what you should be reporting, etc. And then in the third step, we talk about finalizing the template or the report, getting appropriate sign-off, making sure everyone agrees that, yes, this is accurate, and filing it in an appropriate manner, whatever that is. So you would distribute it for sign-off, verify it, make sure it's accurate, and then it would be filed. And again, you'd get that triggering process of every year, every 2 years to be reviewing and updating it. So when you are preparing to conduct a PDD, we want to think about where they're required. It might only be in certain areas, certain departments. You need to determine who needs to be involved. So would it be workers performing the job? I would think so. Probably a manager or HR representative, Joint Health and Safety Committee members. If you're a unionized environment, you probably want a union rep there to verify its accuracy as well. It could be an engineer. It could be maintenance. It could be lots of people, but that's up to you to decide who's appropriate and how they should be involved. They may only be involved for one aspect of this process. That might not be the whole thing. It could be simply deciding which jobs need to be looked at, or it could be verifying the tasks of a job and then someone is no longer involved until final sign-off, for example. Do you have trained observers? If you're doing it internally, you need to have people that have the appropriate training and education to perform these measurements. Do you have all the necessary equipment? So if you're measuring forces, for example, you probably need a force gauge to measure something like pushing and pulling forces. If it's lifting, you may have a scale that you can lift, or they may be known weights for particular things if you're doing manual materials handling. And you might need to schedule a certain observation and data collection. So are you capturing the totality of the job? It could be different on a morning shift than an evening shift, for example. And you want to make sure that you're capturing all aspects of that job, any variation that could be occurring, to making sure that it's comprehensive and accurate. Determine job purpose and task. So this may be something like a roundtable discussion with those people that you deem appropriate through this process. So looking at the job, trying to identify all of the tasks associated with it in sequential order, and also trying to determine which ones are essential and which ones are non-essential. right? So we talk about that at the bottom there. You can see classify essential and non-essential. So this would be verifying the purpose and actually observing the job multiple times, making sure that you're capturing all of the aspects of it, and quantifying. So using verified numeric measures rather than words like frequent and occasional. I want to know exactly how many repetitions, whether it's per minute, per hour, per day, how many times is somebody doing this task with a number. Because it's much more helpful to me for a number of reasons, whether it's a healthcare provider, like I mentioned, or somebody on the Joint Health and Safety Committee, or someone trying to get someone back to work, or even the WSIB looking at from an adjudication perspective to actually have a numeric frequency associated with I do this task X number of times per minute. So here we talk about some of the measurement tools and techniques that would be involved. So things like taking multiple measurements and using the average, recording the absolute values, so things like what is the minimum, what is the maximum, and so reporting the whole range as well as the average, right? So it's important to note that on average, when performing this task, you would lift 10 pounds. But there would be circumstances where the lowest would be 1 or 2 pounds, but there could be extreme cases where it could be 50 pounds. So it's, again, trying to capture the whole aspect, the broad range of minimum, maximum, and the average. There's lots of environmental factors to consider as well, things like noise, lighting, vibration, temperature, and just the types of photographs that you're taking. We strongly encourage in the handbook, and we also have a template, a Word document that you can download and use, but we strongly encourage that you take a photo of each task. To not only have the written description and the numeric measurements, but also a visualization, especially for people that you're sharing this with outside of the organization that have never seen the job being performed before. Picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And we also talk about what an appropriate picture is. You can see the top three being good angles, clearly demonstrating what the task being performed is, versus the ones on the bottom, where you really don't have a good angle to see what's being done and how it's being done. Okay? So clear so far? Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So what we've done is we've developed a list of physical demand elements. So ultimately, once you've gone through, you've observed the job, you have identified all of the tasks that need to be performed, then you would break it down into physical demand elements. And at the back of the handbook, if you do have it with you, you'll see a list of all of these elements, as well as the measures that you should be recording for each of those. So here on the screen, you can see, for example, a lift, a carry, a push, and a pull. Hopefully that's clear. So here's some more. So standing, walking, kneeling, sitting. We have squatting, and then we have balancing, climbing, crawling. We tried to be pretty thorough, as you can see. I forget the title of the one on the left, but then we have a foot action, we have steering, and then we have essentially data entry, or essentially computer work. But we tried to keep it generic in case it wasn't in an office setting. Then we get into hand-specific tasks, so things like pointing, gripping, pinching, writing, reading, okay? As well as things like smelling, tasting, talking, actually having to view something like observing different colors. You get into this with something like a quality assurance type position where someone has to verify a color on something, or they need to verify a clean cut, or they need to put a certain color sticker on something to verify that it's been checked. All of those sorts of things would be captured within this physical demands description as well. Do you need to be able to hear anything? Important if you're considering hiring someone that has a hearing impairment or is deaf. So here's an example of sort of the details that we provide with each of these physical demand elements. So you have the whole list, and then we get into detail about what the important measurements would be. So for a lift or a lower, for example, a description of what that is, as well as the important things to be capturing. So frequency of how often is this lift or lower being performed? What is the weight being lifted or lowered? Again, both minimum, maximum, and average. What is the start height of the lift? What is the end height of the lift? How many hands are used? Is it a one-hand lift? Is it a two-hand lift? What is the horizontal distance away from the body? And again, not trying to get into individual differences, but more, what is the size of the object? If there's handles on the box, then you can measure how far the handles are from the edge of the box. So assuming you could put the box directly against your chest, you'd be able to measure where your hands would be located. What type of grip is used? Are there handles? Are you squeezing something? Is it a slippery surface? Those types of things. And what we tried to do strategically with all of this for any ergonomists watching in is we really tried to design this template so that you could use inputs for different risk assessment tools. So things like the NIOSH equation, the NIOSH lifting equation, for example. We made sure that we captured all of these so you could ultimately complete a physical demands description and then use that data in different risk assessment tools. So something like using these inputs go directly into the NIOSH lifting equation, so then you could calculate whether you're within or below the recommended weight limit, for example. So here's the big physical demands matrix showing all of the different tasks on the left and the required measurements on the right. So you can see there we went over the lift lower. For carry, you would have the frequency, the weight being carried, the height it was carried at, how far or the distance you were carrying it, how many hands were used, again the reach distance if there was one required, and the grip type. So you can see some of them have less than others, such as a crouch or a squat simply is frequency and duration. But ultimately we have a lot of detail here that we're asking people to complete. And you can see how much more thorough this is than simply putting a checkbox saying somebody lifts 33% of the time. So we were very conscious of what we're asking people to do and why we're asking them to do it. So we have our PDD template, which is a Word document. It's in the handbook itself, but you can also download it from our website. So it's a Word document that's freely available, and you can populate this for yourself. So you have here, you can see we've said insert a photo into this box, type a description of what task it is that you're performing, enter the duration of how often you're doing it, as well as the frequency. And then, depending on the task element, we'll tell you how many measures you should have. The maximum being 7, as you can see there, but it might only be 2 or 3. It's going to be dependent on the physical demand element that's being performed. So in an example, you would insert a photo of somebody lifting a box. You would, under task element, you would put lift box, and then you would input there the different measures that you were capturing, and then what measure you actually collected. Is that all clear so far? So here's an example that was completed by someone. So the photo might not show up that clearly, but it's driving a loader or front-end loader. So you can see here the description saying the worker will move sand and stone from storage lots from the plant yard to an underground hopper that funnels materials onto a conveyor belt. You can see for the task duration, it's a range, again, because it's not always going to be the same, but 5 to 15 minutes per material. The frequency is 12 to 15 times per shift. And you can see under task elements, there would be sit, for how long that is, what the seat dimensions are, etc. For driving, the duration, the hand height while in the vehicle, what the vehicle is, what type of surface they're driving on, and any other surroundings or pertinent information like they need to watch out for other vehicles. In terms of foot action, so they're using brake and a gas pedal, for example, the force required to do that, and what it is that they're applying their foot force on. So in this example, it's an accelerator. Any questions so far? Okay. So when you complete all this, sorry. Yep.
So on that particular slide, just go back, it talks about driving, but isn't there lever work as well with regards to...
Most likely. And then so that example, then you would enter a hand task element as well. And then depending on the inputs, you would describe the type of grip, the force required, how often you're doing it, the height, etc. Yep. No, that's a good point. So the question was if there was a hand lever in order to operate a piece of machinery, then obviously there would be a physical demand associated with that, and you would capture it with one of the other physical demand elements in that list, like gripping, for example, or it could be a push or pull. Yep.
The other thing, too, is if I remember correctly, people that operate vehicles, especially equipment, there's a pre and post inspection of the vehicle as well.
Okay. I was going to reiterate what he said, but that's okay. If you don't mind speaking into the mic so people can. Okay. Is there something further to the question? Okay, so just for those that couldn't hear, he was saying, okay, he has more to say.
So a person's operating a vehicle. Working? Hello?
Not working. Hold on.
So
There we go.
an individual driving heavy equipment is demonstrating these task elements. There's other possible task elements that are essential. So beginning to drive or use an operating vehicle, the first point I made is pre and post inspection, going around the vehicle, crouching, squatting, kneeling, then mounting, dismounting the vehicle.
Yep.
Those are other potential task elements.
Okay, yeah, so if everybody's clear, they could hear the question. You should note, though, that this is simply one task. So this is simply driving the loader, right? So in this example, you might have 15 tasks. So one could be inspect the vehicle, and then you would list all of the physical demands associated with inspect the vehicle. You would probably have enter the vehicle. You would have drive the vehicle. You would have exit. And so there would be specific measures for all of those tasks. So this is simply, as you can see, it says number 1, driving loader. You might have 15. So you might have a whole bunch of tasks. You've observed the whole job. You can see all of the tasks that they need to perform. Then you would capture all of the physical elements for each task. So it could be a fairly lengthy, comprehensive document.
Curtis, I've got a question for you from online.
Sure.
What time frame is best practice for updating PDDs where the position has not changed? Is 5 years appropriate?
You're going to love my answer. I'm going to say it depends. I think if nothing in general has changed, 5 years is probably appropriate. But how are you verifying that nothing has changed? I think that's the question. So if you can somehow validate that yes, nothing has changed, then 5 years might be appropriate. But I think you should be asking that question at least on an annual basis, I would think. And if it hasn't changed, then you simply renew it and keep it as is. But I would suggest an annual basis to review, and if nothing has changed, then you would move on. But I think annual would be a good time. And it also depends on the size of your facility, right? It depends. If you have a massive facility, you might have a 2-year cycle where you do half of your jobs in the first year and half in the second year, and it's sort of a 2-year cycle that you're covering all jobs. So it really depends on the specific type of job, whether things have changed, how big your facility is, et cetera.
Okay, I've got some more questions.
Okay.
How long has this template been in use, and what has the initial feedback been like?
Good question. It's been in use. I'm trying to remember specifically now when we released it. I want to say about a year. What I can say is people are using it. I know, for example, Queen's University is using it and completing it and has had really good feedback on its use and its applicability. I don't have many other specific examples as of yet, but it is being used and the feedback has been positive.
Okay. I got another one.
Okay.
How do you balance the need for detail with practicalities of time required? Some jobs have many varied tasks at this level of detail would be prohibitive to collect in my experience. That's not my experience, it's the person asking the question.
Very good points. I think a lot of that would come down to what are you using physical demands descriptions for. And that's going to dictate likely whether you need this level of detail and how many jobs you should be doing. Again, it's sort of that window thing of how many should we be completing in a year, and let's start moving that process forward, and which ones are a priority, which ones are required. And we talk about that in the handbook, how to prioritize, how to determine which ones are needed, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it kind of depends, but I would say if you're finding it's too cumbersome and comprehensive to do for every job, then you should be prioritizing and selecting specific jobs that you think do require this much detail and this much information, and why. Like, what are they being used for?
Got another one.
Okay.
We opened Pandora's box.
That's okay.
Can you have more than one task element breakdown for the same thing, e.g. lifting, to separate between the majority of lifting being in the 5 to 10 kilogram range, waist to chest height, and the odd item being in the outlier range, e.g. a 20 kilogram ladder on a van roof?
Yeah, I think that comes a bit into interpretation in the job itself. So you might put the most common elements, and then you might put exceptions or odd cases, and you could list it as a separate task even if you wanted to. So again, part of this is in interpretation and how you want to structure it. And so if there are one-off or odd examples, I would probably list that as a separate task. And so you would have lifting, for example, for your regular task, and then you might have edge case or extreme circumstances where you would have an extreme heavy lift, something like that. And that would be far less frequent, for example. Any more?
Someone's typing, but you may as well carry on.
Okay, well, someone else has a question, so I'm going to pass the mic. I anticipated lots of questions, so this is good.
Would there be a short form of this to accompany you after an injury, like to the emergency department or something? Like, so the physician would be able to accommodate your light duties?
Good question. I don't know. We don't have a short form. What I would say, though, is ideally you would have access to it within your workplace, and you could have a copy. But we don't specifically have a short form, no.
Okay. Do you use the DOT, physical demands categories, to classify jobs or individual tasks, light, medium, for example? This is sometimes useful when physicians recommend light work.
I'm not quite clear on the question.
Okay. Do you use the DOT, physical demands categories, to classify jobs?
What do you mean by DOT, physical demands?
I'm assuming that's the one where they have like a dot and an arrow.
Or a dictionary of...
Okay, there you go.
Oh, Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Okay, sorry. Can you read the whole question now that I know what it, yeah.
Okay, and they also that in NOC, DOJ, etc. So do you use the DOT physical demands categories to classify jobs or individual tasks, light, medium, for example? This is sometimes useful when physicians recommend light work duty.
I would say no, we don't use those categories. We've simply left it, again, trying to be as broad as we can and as applicable to all jobs as possible. So simply focusing on the task elements, and someone else would determine which, like the physical demand elements. The workplace or whoever's completing it would be determining what those tasks are. So they certainly could use some of these other category systems, and then simply underneath of that would be the physical demands. That would be my response.
We're clear for questions right now.
Okay. I'll keep going. That's all right. We're near the end. So in terms of once you've completed this process, you've observed the job, you've taken all your measurements, you've inputted it into the template, you think you have it completed, you would then go through and finalize that PDD document, right? You would distribute to the appropriate people for sign-off, whoever you've deemed appropriate within your organization. In an organized workplace, it would likely be some sort of management sign-off and union sign-off, verifying that this is accurate, and we both agree that this documents the job completely, and then it would be filed in some sort of system and backed up. So essentially just guiding through people from start to finish, trying to prepare and decide how many PDDs need to be completed, how often, how are we going to prioritize, etc., through the documentation, the observation and measurement process, and then finally to the reporting stage when you've completed and finalized a physical demands description for a particular job. So we already touched on some of this, but timeline for review and updates, it depends. You're going to have to ask that question to decide what's appropriate for your organization. Again, my sort of default recommendation would be annually. If you have a very large workplace, that might not be feasible, but you need to determine what that timeline is. I already touched on use of data for MSD prevention. So when you are completing this and you're doing this process, how are you using that information? If you think that there is a job that's problematic or a certain task that's problematic, you may want to dig further and look at some different assessment tools. Like I mentioned, the NIOS lifting equation. So there's lots of uses for this information outside of just the physical demands document itself. You can use it for further investigation and further prevention efforts within your workplace. Currently, we're actually collaborating with the WSIB to potentially standardize this as the way physical demands would be reported and shared with the WSIB. So I'm currently talking with them about that. They like the template. They like that it's numeric and it has objective measures. And so we're sort of, they're reviewing currently their process, because currently they simply accept physical demands, and they have what's called their PDIF, if you're familiar with that, the Physical Demands Information Form. And so that's sort of all under review currently, and they're considering how that could change, and this is a possibility, or at least some of this is a possibility. So, in overview of the whole handbook as a whole, there's a strong emphasis on the process, right? Going through this whole process, considering what you need to do, how often you need to do it, what needs to be documented, and using objective measurements. I think that's probably one of the key points of all of this, is getting away from broad, vague things like 0 to 30% of the time to actual measures and actual numbers. How much force, etc., and not using postural measures. Like I mentioned, describing that you perform this task and use 30% back flexion is not accurate and not appropriate, because that's going to be different for everyone. That's not innate within the job task, because it can be performed in different ways. So focusing on the job and objectively measuring all of the physical aspects of that job. So the template is applicable in a wide range of settings. Like I said, we're trying to make it as applicable for everyone as possible. So any industry, any type of job, any sector. So it could be used as a standalone resource, this handbook, or it could simply be supplementing something you already have in place. You may already have a really nice process of collecting and documenting. Maybe you're just using the template, for example. Or maybe you don't have anything in place, and this will be a really nice resource for you to build and implement a physical demands description program within your workplace. So I think that's all for me. Any further questions? Maybe we'll just go back one slide. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, we've reached that time in the day where it's the hardest presentation to sit through. Mine. After lunch is always kind of hard to go, but we'll do the best we can. Just waiting for them to bring it up. While they're bringing it up, just a reminder, please fill in the evaluation forms, both those in the audience, those online. It's the only way we have of knowing if we're doing a good job. And at the same time, it has a section on future topics that you may be interested in. Now, I'm going to be talking about upper limb cumulative trauma disorders, RSIs, MSDs, whatever the heck you want to call it. So, to begin with, one thing we never discussed today is, for those who don't know, what is ergonomics? Well, basically it's the laws of work, how we function. There's other definitions. The science of studying people at work and designing the job so they can be safe, healthy, effective, and comfortable. Fit the job to the worker, not the worker to the job. Or the one-word answer, adjustability. The ability to adjust the workstation to fit your own personal dimensions. OSHA defines it as the science of designing the job to fit the worker instead of forcing the worker to fit the job. So there's a whole whack load of different definitions out there. Ideally, though, ergonomics makes the job safer by preventing injury and illness, makes the job easier by adjusting the job to the worker, makes the job more pleasant by reducing physical and mental stress, and ultimately saves you money. How much do you think a low back compensation claim will run a company in a year? Someone throw me out a number here. Lots isn't an answer. I want a dollar value. Come on. What's that? $100,000. Exactly. You've got the worker off. You've got a replacement worker. You got W. Were you guessing, or did you actually know that, by the way? Were you guessing? Yeah? So you got the worker off, replacement worker in, plus the increased WSAB costs. Now, if someone is working at a job, so for example, someone's sitting at a desk, which Nicholas told us we shouldn't be doing all day long, they're experiencing a lot of back pain. How focused are they on doing their job? Not focused at all. They're on their pain. So, hey, $300. The ergonomist came in, said we should get a new chair for this person. It's going to cost $300. Well, a case study done at call centers found that buying a new chair paid for itself within 1 month of increased productivity. Because no longer was the worker in pain, no longer were they focusing on, oh, this really hurts. They were pain-free, they're able to work, paid for itself to increase productivity. So ergonomics doesn't have to be expensive, and there is the whole economics of ergonomics speech that you try and make to companies. Now, other aliases for work-related musculoskeletal disorders has been touched on by Minister Flynn earlier, but CTD, cumulative trauma disorder, occupational overuse syndrome, repetitive strain injury, repetitive motion injury, they're all the same thing. It's a generic umbrella term used to describe an ache or pain anywhere in the body. When someone comes to our clinic and we do our mandate reviews, and they're coming here for, is my RSI related to my work? We send them back to the doctor to come back with an actual diagnosis. I want carpal tunnel syndrome, epicondylitis, thoracic outlet syndrome, something physical besides pain. I've always liked cumulative trauma disorder because cumulative, it occurs gradually over weeks, months, or years. Trauma, this physical injury to the nerves, tissues, tendons, or joints. And disorder, there's a physical ailment or abnormal condition. Now, ergonomic hazards are workplace conditions that pose a risk of injury to the musculoskeletal system of the worker. Now, Dwayne in his presentation talked about the big three, but there's actually a lot more. Repetition, awkward postures, static postures, temperatures, excessive force, vibration, compression, and inadequate recovery or rest periods. So examples of repetition, thousands of keystrokes typing, hours of filing, stapling dozens of papers, frequent lifting, repeated motions with the mouse on the desk as opposed to a keyboard tray. They're all examples of repetitive motions. Awkward positions, leaning forward at your desk, not sitting back in the chair like Nick was telling us to do. Typing your wrists at an odd angle, having your keyboard on those little feet angled towards you in that positive angle, raising your shoulders while typing, having your armrest too high in your chair. We want to be sitting nice and relaxed, as Nick was saying. Reaching to use the mouse, twisting your neck to look at the monitor, or, once again, as Nick said, doing the gooseneck when you're talking on the phone. Lifting objects from below waist height or above shoulder height are other examples. His example of an awkward posture, someone's working with a little computer on a desk working like this. Now they come in, they bring it up higher. Hey, I'm now working in a neutral position. I'm not bending. I'm not slouching. Awkward examples of the hand. Ulnar radial deviations, flexion, extension of the wrist, and pinching again. When I was sitting at the back when Curtis was doing his PDD talk, someone went, pinching. Well, yeah, pinching. Because if we assume I can't pop, okay, Denny, don't take this picture because it looks like I'm doing product placement for Pepsi, okay? I'm a Coke person. But if we assume this can of pop weighed 10 pounds, if I use my whole hand to lift it, basically I'm exerting 2 pounds of force on my fingers and my thumb. But if I use a pinch grip, I'm now doing 5 pounds of force on my thumb and my index finger. So by using a pinch grip, I'm recruiting less muscles to do the exact same task. So that's why pinching is a problem. Another example of awkward postures. Once we get our wrist away from neutral, so if we either extend it or flex it, you can see in the picture, our grip strength decreases. And that just doesn't apply to the wrist. It applies to every single part of the body. So when we're talking about the ideal lifting height being standing knuckle to standing elbow, this is where we get the most muscle recruitment. And that's why when we do curls, they're done this way. Because of the fact we're able to recruit the strongest part of the body. This is the optimal position for doing these tasks, is 90 degrees. Static postures are present when holding awkward postures for long periods of time. So in this example, we have a mechanic laying on the ground, working with his arms up. Well, they brought in what's called a creeper, brought him forward. He's now reducing the amount of strain on his shoulders. So I know it's late in the afternoon, but I do want everyone to stand up. What I'd like you to do is put your arms straight out in front of you. We've done this before. I know everyone's going, here we go again. Move your fingers back and forth. So right now, we're in an awkward position. It's repetitive because we're moving our fingers. It's forceful because we're moving our fingers. We're holding our arms upright, and it's a static position. Anyone starting to notice a slight burning on the outside of their elbow? If I don't hear a unanimous yes, you have to keep doing it. Okay, sit down. So in that awkward position, we're not getting blood delivered to the muscles. We need, when we're being dynamic, we need high blood flow because blood brings oxygen into the muscles and takes away waste products. In that awkward position, that static effort, we need a lot of blood, but we're not getting it. Fatigue sets in. Pain sets in. But that's my job. If I'm working upright overhead all day long and I push past that pain, that's when the risk of injury is going to happen. Cold temperatures. They say working in degrees below 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius begins to limit blood flow to the extremities. So once again, we don't get blood delivered to the extremities. Fatigue, pain sets in, the risk of injury increases. Examples of excessive force. Typing with too much force of pounding the keys. I always use the example, you go into an auto body shop or to your local garage, they're inputting your information, they don't type on the computer, they pound. Computer's bouncing up and down, well, it's not good for your keyboard and it's not good for your muscles. It can cause microtrauma. Stamping, lifting heavy boxes, or once again, using an improper grip. Vibration. Of all the provinces, here in the north is where we have the biggest issues with vibration. Be it whole body vibration from long-haul truck drivers, tram operators, to hand-on vibration with a lot of our miners, diamond drillers, jackleg operators, stoper. We see a lot of vibration issues. Vibration doesn't cause white hand. Whole body vibration, for example, disc degeneration, GI disorders, gastrointestinal problems, blood flow issues, varicose veins. Vibration is nasty. At the same time, there's a strong link between carpal tunnel syndrome and vibration exposure as well. So there's a vibration really is an outlier when it comes to ergonomics because it's just one of those crazy ones that you really don't know what it's going to do sometimes. Compression is another one. So, for example, I'm looking at Ernie sitting here with his elbow resting on the table. Well, that's actually compressing the nerves and blood vessels going into his hand. If he keeps doing that, his hand's going to get numb. You been doing that a lot today? No? Keep doing it. I'll ask you that at the end of the presentation. You stay like that. But it cuts off blood flow and nerve supply going into the extremities. So that could be, working with your computer up on a desk or mousing with your elbow sitting on a desk like this. It compresses blood flow and nerve supply going into the arm. Another example, if your seat is too high, so your feet are dangling in the air, that's going to give you the pinching, cutting off blood flow, nerve supply. Or if your seat's too deep for you, it's going to pinch you on the back of the leg, once again, cutting off blood flow and nerve supply. Now, any questions about the risk factors? I'm going to talk now about 3 of my favorite musculoskeletal disorders. Okay. Carpal tunnel syndrome. Who knows someone who's got carpal tunnel syndrome? Raise your hands. I'm not going to ask if it's you. I just want to know if you know somebody. So the main symptoms, numbness and tingling in your hands, and a reduction in grip strength. Main work-related risk factors, non-neutral postures, repetition, excessive force, and vibration. Now, the carpal tunnel and carpal tunnel syndrome are 2 separate things. Don't ever come up to me and say, I have carpal tunnel. Well, we all have a carpal tunnel. The carpal tunnel is an anatomical structure made up of the bones of the wrist, the finger flexor tendons, the median nerve, which supplies the electrical stimulation for the muscles to move, and this is covered over by the transverse carpal ligament. That is the carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnel syndrome is the disorder that results within that anatomical space. Now, the tendons of the hand have around them a protective sheath called a synovial sheath. And what this does, it acts as a lubricator. So if we experience friction forces, irritations on the tendon, it secretes a fluid to allow gliding so you don't get that friction and irritation. But the problem is, this is the fixed space. Everything is filled in by this transverse carpal ligament. So we get these exposure to these risk factors. We get irritation on the tendons. It secretes fluid. But because this is a fixed space, and we've done nothing to rectify the cause of it, we get more irritation. We get more irritation, we get more fluid. So as a result, these sheaths keep swelling, swelling, swelling. And what they do is they press that median nerve up against that transverse carpal ligament. That's what causes the numbness and the tingling. We're basically pinching the nerve against the transverse carpal ligament. Here's a better example of that. So you can see the blue represents the sheath, the white's the tendons, you can see them moving back and forth. The yellow's the median nerve, and then you can see the band of the transverse carpal ligament over top of it. So basically, that yellow nerve gets pressed up against the ligament, the numbness results. There's also non-work-related factors that can result in carpal tunnel syndrome. Diabetes, alcoholism, infection, osteoarthritis of the wrist, just being a woman, pregnancy. My wife in her final trimester, and probably a lot of women in the room as well, final trimester pregnancy experienced carpal tunnel syndrome. About 2 months after my kids were born, it went away. Obesity due to fluid retention on the joints, and also hormone fluctuations. Thyroid conditions as well are the main ones that can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome. Mechanical causes, flexion, extension of the wrists. Force on the tendons for the median nerve causes irritation of the tendon, putting pressure on the nerve. Vibration, which limits blood flow to the hands, causing starving of the tissues in the area. And also mechanical stress, using your hand as a hammer. Awkward postures, I mentioned before, ulnar radial deviations are 2 of them. The symptoms are characterized by pain and numbness in the hands, tingling, coldness, swelling of the fingers, and shrinking of your thumb muscles. And the shrinking happens due to lack of electrical stimulation from the median nerve. Treatments for it, conservatively, they'll splint your wrists in a neutral posture and try the injection of a corticosteroid. Success rate, if you're not addressing the cause of it, for example, if it's a work-related cause, you're not addressing it, success rate is very low. If it's a medical condition that they're treating, the success rate is higher. However, it normally results in surgery. The first is not real, it's just graphics, okay? So there's no blood. The first is the open procedure. So this is the one that results in the big scar going down the wrist. The advantage, increased visibility to control the ability to control bleeding. You can actually see what you're doing a lot better. But there is the downside, it takes longer to heal from this procedure because you have a bigger cut. With the closed procedure, they go in using an endoscope. So the advantage is smaller incision, increased healing time, but there's reduced visibility during the procedure. People often say to me, well, I've had carpal tunnel surgery. Why am I still having the numbness and the tingling? There's a couple of reasons. One, you have a non-work-related condition, something caused by medical. 2, you've waited too long and you have permanent nerve damage. 3, you have a whole other different condition that I'm going to talk about later. Or 4, they didn't do a complete sectioning of the transverse carpal ligament, and there could still be a couple strands left. Any questions about carpal tunnel syndrome at all? Okay. Next I'm going to talk about tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, also known as epicondylitis. Now, our muscles that connect to our elbow on either side of these bones are called epicondyles. So epicondylitis is inflammation around the epicondyles. These muscles are very powerful, very strong, but they're attaching on very small surfaces. As the wrist is flexed or the hand is used to grip, the muscles contract, pull against the tendons. So basically, a standard muscle has your muscle and it attaches to the bone with tendons. So when we go to do a task, the muscles shorten and pull the tendons on either end of the bone forward. So what happens with epicondylitis is that the tendons, when they attach to the bone, begin to tear away from the bone. So examples, repeated supination and pronation. What's that? Well, it's this type of action. So supination, my hands up, like I'm receiving a bowl of soup. Pronation, I'm turning it the opposite direction. The best example I can give, someone, you go into a tire shop, getting tires changed, they're using a ratchet or a mechanic, using that ratchet type action is the perfect example. We've also seen it people who mouse sort of with their mouse up away from their body. Another one is you ever go into your local, I can't say the name, but a coffee institution that's across the country. There's a lot of people working there that have the black tensors on their elbow. You ever notice that when you go in? Next time you go physically, not drive through, when you physically go into the store, watch. A lot of the staff will be wearing that black tensor around the elbow. The reason for that, and this goes back to my talk I did last year about anthropometrics, equipment is designed for the average male who's 5'10". Average female is 5'4". Who in this room is less than 5'4"? A good chunk. Okay. So we got someone who's 5 foot reaching up to grab the coffee from about this height. So up, grab the coffee, bring it down, pour it in, take it, put it back up. Reach with the spoon, grab the sugar, stir, put the spoon back, grab the lid, put it on. How many times was I moving my elbow? A lot. That's just for one cup of coffee. The average worker at one of these coffee places will do at least 600 to 800 cups of coffee in a morning shift. So that's why you'll see a lot of those tensor bands in that institution. So the symptoms, where the tendon attaches, becomes irritated and leads to rupture of the muscle fibers. The pain is localized over the elbow joint that radiates down into the forearm and eventually the fingers. And the pain's of a dull, aching nature that sharpens upon motion of the extensor muscles. So in this example, you can sort of see the red. So that indicates where the symptoms actually mainly occur. So just right in this area here. Did I hear something? Okay, I thought that was the question. Treatments. They'll inject a corticosteroid into the area of tenderness. They'll try anti-inflammatories. Ice to reduce the size of the blood vessels and slow inflammation. Exercise early on. Isometrics to maintain muscle use. As the pain lessens, they'll try more vigorous exercises. And then they'll use the splint, that tensor around the elbow as well. Surgically, they're going to do something called a fasciotomy. What they do is they actually physically cut the tendon away from the bone, cut away the area that's become frayed and bound up with scar tissue, and glue it back onto the bone. And yes, with the face, I will be showing a picture. There we go. So they'll cut it away, excise the area, glue it back on, and sew it back up. Now, they have to be careful not to take away too much of the tendon, because if they take away too much, we'd never be able to fully extend your arm again. So they have to be very careful not to cut too much of that away. Any questions about epicondylitis? Okay. Where we're going to be done early because this is my last disorder. My favorite disorder, well, one of my two favorite disorders is thoracic outlet syndrome. The other one's stupid contraction. We'll talk about that another time. Thoracic outlet syndrome involves the shoulder and the upper arm. It affects both blood flow and nerve supply. It's a general term for compression of the nerves and blood vessels between the neck and shoulder. It's extremely difficult to prove and is normally done after other diagnoses have been ruled out. So, nerves and blood vessels that run into the arm start at the side of the neck, right in this area here. They exit from the side of the spine through openings in the vertebrae called foramen. The nerve roots join. So right in this area here, for example, I have about 7 nerves coming off my spinal cord, fusing together, going down to my shoulder, and branching into the median, the median nerve, which once again is associated with carpal tunnel syndrome. The median nerve supplies my thumb, index, middle, and the inside of my ring finger. That's how we know someone's got carpal tunnel syndrome, if it's that side. If it's the pinky and the outside of the ring finger is actually the ulnar nerve that's being pinched. So that's one way to differentiate between pain. So they basically form from all these nerves coming off the neck. The area where the nerve and blood vessels leave the neck is called the thoracic outlet. So we've got our scalenus muscles, our collarbone, the brachial plexus or the nerves, as well as the artery and vein, and our ribs. The symptoms, very similar to carpal tunnel syndrome. Pain and numbness in the neck region that extends down into the hands, and the symptoms are due to compression of the nerves and blood vessels. So here we go with the blue is the median nerve, the yellow is the ulnar nerve. Causes extreme rotation of the arm about the shoulder, so either working with the arms up, at, or out to the side. The muscles and tendons get deprived of blood flow and nerve supply. This slows the recovery of the muscles and limits the duration of muscle activity. So you can see in the picture on that side. It's backwards for me, so I guess it's to the left for everybody, or is it the right for you? Left? Okay. Picture on the left, you got someone reaching up. You can see how all the structures are being stretched underneath the collarbone. This example is a lot better. So in this example, we have someone lifting their arm up. In the one on the right, you can actually see the nerve and blood vessels being physically compressed by the scalenus muscle. So someone's reaching their hand up overhead. So treatments for this, stretching and exercise. That's about it. Surgery is always done as a last resort. It's directed at removing the source of the compression on the nerves. Some people are born with an extra rib, so they'll just go in and take the extra rib out. But it normally consists of releasing the constricting elements and scar tissue. It's normally done to an incision under the arm where the nerve runs. What happens is they actually physically cut away part of the scalenus muscles. So once again, we lose a huge amount of strength that happens, and that's not looping. Let's go back and forward again. Okay. So we lose a huge amount of strength now going into our arm once the surgery is done. That's why the surgery is a last resort, because it has so many implications for what you can do for your career later on. Now, based on the fact that thoracic outlet and carpal tunnel have similar symptoms, remember I said those people who said they've had surgery and still have problems? The reason is they may have been misdiagnosed. One of our doctors and I pulled about 50 compensation files for carpal tunnel only, and we looked at the diagnostic testing that was done. What they do for the testing is they'll put an electrode on, for example, either side of the wrist, and shoot an electric current down the nerve and measure how long it takes to travel between A and B. If it's slower than a normal value, you're impinged and you have carpal tunnel syndrome. So we want to see how many people were testing at only one site compared to two sites, meaning the elbow. And we found only about 50% of them were being tested at both sites. Why both sites? Well, if we shoot that same electric current down, and I'm normal at the elbow, and I'm slow at the wrist, that would indicate carpal tunnel syndrome. But they shot the same current down, and I was slow at the elbow and slow at the wrist, I'm being pinched higher up. And that's the best way to rule out carpal tunnel from thoracic outlet, because the symptoms are the same. Numbness on that part of the hand. So that's why we advocate that when people go for testing, make sure they do both sites to ensure you're not undergoing unnecessary surgery. So mentioned there are personal risk factors that can lead to the cause of these disorders. Age and gender. I mentioned carpal tunnel syndrome. Women are more likely than men. Age, as we get older, our bodies are less elastic. It takes longer to heal and recover from injuries. Hobbies. Some literature states that those who do knitting, for example, are at a higher risk of developing carpal tunnel syndrome. Some avid high-end bowlers are more likely to develop tennis elbow, playing tennis elbow. Previous injuries. Once we've been hurt, we're never fully back to 100%. We are more likely to re-injure ourselves once we've been hurt. Physical condition. If we're not in good physical shape, it does take longer to heal and recover. Medical conditions such as diabetes and arthritis. Pregnancy, I mentioned. Obesity due to fluid retention on the joints. Certain medications restrict blood flow and nerve supply going into the extremities. Smoking reduces blood flow. And also fatigue. If we're tired, we're not getting a good night's sleep, we're not going to heal. Sleep, when we're sleeping, that's when our body heals itself. So if we're in pain, if we're not getting a good night's sleep, we're not going to heal like we should. So if you experience signs and symptoms, talk to your supervisor, your ergonomist, hygienist, safety professional, joint health and safety committee member. If it doesn't go away when you leave work or interferes with carrying out normal activities, see a nurse or a physician. Now, I say this every year. No one wants to be part of the compensation system. It's not a place where you want to be. No one wants to go through the hell. I mean, I've had 40-year-old guys in my office crying because they've lost their wife, their house, their kids. They have no quality of life. They're addicted to oxys. That's not where anyone wants to be. The attitude of, I'll work through it. It'll get better. It doesn't work. Only way to fix something is to come forward and get the issue addressed. Otherwise, you are just a number. You are just going to go through the system. And going through it, you can be OWA people. Average time to go from start to finish of a claim. 3 years. 3 years, no money, no income coming in. That's not a way to live. And then, after that 3-year period, what's the likelihood of your claim being accepted on average? Well, not from your office, but in general, of a claim. So there's a 40% chance your claim's not going to be accepted. What the hell do you do then? That's not where you want to be. I've done a lot of studies, a lot of research projects with different organizations. We have found out 50% I just studied custodians. 50% of custodians, for example, had moderate to severe low back pain. Of those people, of those 150, only 75 of them had ever sought medical attention. Moderate to severe pain, that's pretty painful. But only half sought medical attention. Only half went to the Joint Health and Safety Committee. If your medical professional, if your health and safety reps don't know what's going on, they can't fix the problem. Speak up. Because you know what? At times, we're our own worst enemies. It's not going to get better. Come forward. That's my soapbox. So how do we avoid it? Try working in neutral positions. Reduce excessive force and repetition. Keep everything in easy-to-reach and proper heights. Keep warm. Minimize static, unsupported postures and pressure points. Use proper lifting techniques and lifting aids. Ask for assistance with difficult tasks. Take micro breaks. Stand, stretch, change your tasks, and maintain a comfortable working environment. And that's it for my presentation. Any questions at all? Curtis, can I get you to check the laptop, see if there's anything online? While we're doing that, once again, please fill in the evaluation forms. If there's no questions, you'll get to go home early, I think. But I didn't say you could go yet. Just check to see if there's anything there. No, just check to see if there's anything on the screen. I don't know. I doubt there's anything, but... Okay, Jeff?
Are there not other causes of TOS, that is to say upper back and neck tension related to stress or prolonged positioning with his arms forward, that is to say computer work possession?
No. I mean, as I mentioned, the awkward positions of working with your arm outright, such as mousing on the desk, is a risk factor for thoracic outlet syndrome. But chances are the person is describing is actually rotator cuff, frozen shoulder. There's a number of other disorders of the shoulder that can happen. The thoracic outlet is the numbness and tingling that radiates into the hand, not physical pain in the shoulder area. Anything else, Jeff? Okay. So if there's no other questions, if there are questions, feel free to email me. I can either send them off to the other presenters or deal with them myself. Otherwise, fill in the evaluation forms. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see you all next year.